How Nick's liking for diapers started. One summer day. What started out as a normal day ended up being the longest day ever for a 5-year-old named Nick. His mom and dad were leaving for a vacation and needed someone to watch him. Nick's mom's was a teacher at Somerset High School and a responsible 17-year-old girl named Jenny from the high school cheerleaders squad. Jenny was off for the summer and needed a part-time job, so she took the offer. 4 days later, Jenny arrived at the house while Nick's parents were getting ready to leave. They gave her some money for food or anything she would need to take care of him before saying goodbye. After Nick's parents left, the phone rang. It was 2 of Jenny's friends on three-way line, Jill and Tracy. Jenny knew it would be a long week, so she invited them over. When the girls arrived, they all went into the living room and sat in front of the TV, and ended up watching Sesame Street with Nick. That didn't last very long since the girls were getting bored and it was too nice outside to be in a house with no air conditioning. Then Jenny's friend Jill suddenly remembered about a beach festival in the town of Santiago 2 hours away. There was a teen idol band playing on a stage that had been built in a gigantic tent near the beach. When she told the other 2 girls, they didn't waste any time with their decisions, they were ready to go. Although Jenny had to babysit Nick, he was a quiet toot, and bringing him along didn't seem to be a problem. Just then Jenny remembered Nick's mom telling her that he had a stomachache, and that he had not used the washroom in 2 days. Jenny told Nick that she had to put a diaper on him before leaving. Nick became angry. He didn't think it was fair that the girls were wearing shorts and he had to wear a diaper, but he had no choice. She put one on him anyway. After she was done, he tried to take it off. "If you take your diaper off, I will make you wear it all day," said Jenny. Then Tracy said in a joking voice, "Even if he poops." Nick didn't find the joke very funny. His diaper was so big he had to hobble instead of walk, but he knew if he took it off, he would spend all day in them. It was now time to leave, and Jenny put Nick in a baby seat in the back of Jill's car, and Tracy agreed to watch him. They had not even been driving for 10 minutes and Nick had already started. The girls were having trouble listening to the radio because he would not stop talking, and kept trying to get out of his seat. Tracy was sitting in the back with him and said, "If you don't stop, I'm going to tickle you." Nick stopped instantly. He knew how Tracy liked to tickle him, but this time he had no defense. He was strapped in a seat and couldn't stop her. "Good, now we can start listening to our music again," said Jill. Jenny called to the back of the car where Tracy was and asked, "Can you hand me the baby powder in the bag with Nick's diapers?" "Sure," said Tracy. Then a second later, Tracy replied, oh, I think we forgot his bag." Then Jenny remembered, "You're right, we left it on the kitchen table and Nick's clothes and diapers were in there." "What is he going to wear?" said Jenny. The girls began to argue about how they were going to find clothes for Nick to wear at the festival. There wasn't a place for 50 miles where they were going, and definitely no cloth stores. "Don't worry you guys," said Jill, "we'll figure something out when we get there. For now he will just have to walk around in his diaper." Nick was being quiet through most of the commotion, but that didn't last very long. Once more he was tiring to get out of his seat. When Tracy looked at Nick and it was obvious, he had number 2 written all over his face. He needed to use the washroom, but there was nowhere to stop, and they had an hour of driving left. "Sorry Nick," said Tracy, "you'll just have to hold it, we're not stopping." It was easy for her to say. Nick's face was filled with anger as he struggled to undo the straps that encased his body. It was impossible. No. "You're not getting out," said Tracy. He looked like he was about to poop in his diaper right there. He finally gave up, and somehow managed to forget about it and fell asleep. 40 minutes later they arrived at the beach. They drove around for 10 minutes before finding a parking spot. It seemed like every teenager in the world had showed up that day. After they parked the car, Jenny woke Nick up, and took him out of the car and had him stand by her while she and the other girls looked at the map of the park. He did not look very happy standing there in his big disposable diaper with hundreds of people walking around, but now he had a bigger problem. His urge to use the washroom was now in demand. It had been almost 3 days since he last went, and his intestines felt like they were going to explode. His stomach rumbled from the presence of an atomic bomb that was about to go off in his diaper. The girls were so worried about getting their concert tickets that they didn't even notice Nick pacing. "Let's go," said Jill, "we have to hurry." Nick had no choice but to follow the girls. They were walking so fast he had to struggle to keep up. It was hard not to notice by his duck-like walk that he was about to take a dump in his diaper. When they arrived at the ticket stands, they ran into 5 girls from their high school's cheerleaders squad and stopped to talk. Nick couldn't wait another minute. While they were talking, he noticed 2 portable johns and one of them was open. He desperately ran toward the door, but before he could even get there, someone walked in and locked the door. That was all he could take. His load was almost in his diaper, and he needed a bathroom fast. Jenny noticed him wondering and said, "You better get over here, or I'm going to come and get you." Nick wasn't listening to anyone. He had to go so bad that he couldn't even think straight. All the girls had stopped talking and their attention was focused on Nick's nerves-like gestures. The timing couldn't be worse, when all of the sudden Jill told the other girls, "Nick likes to be tickled, and I think we should tickle him." Almost instantly, before he could even get away, he was on the ground being tickled by 5 girls all at once. Just then the bathroom door opened, but it was too late. His face turned red, and his diaper yelled out a muffled sound, like the sound that a tube of ketchup makes as it is being squeezed. The girls didn't notice, but Nick had pooped a king-size load in his diaper, and the moment of humiliation was soon to follow. The girls were now done tickling and they let him go. At last he crawled away and clumsy-like made it to his feet. Nick did not know what to do next. They were all just standing there looking at him with smiles from their amusement of watching him squirm around like a bug on hot coals. The load in his diaper was so overwhelming that his walk was now a march. Nick couldn't stand the thought that, no matter where he went from there on, the sticky clump inside his diaper would follow him for the rest of the day, until someone changed him. It was about time for the concert to start and Nick was hoping the 5 girls would leave. It was bad enough Jenny and her friends would find out he had pooped in his diaper, but it would be even more humiliating if the other girls found out. Jenny asked the girls to sit with them during the show, and the girls said they would. When he heard that, he began to get anxious. There was no way he could sit through a show for 2 hours in poppy diapers without one of the girls noticing. They began to walk to the lines where the guards were taking tickets. When they went into the tent, it was packed with people, and the seats were almost all taken. They found 8 seats, but there were 9 of them including Nick. "He's going to have to sit on someone's lap," said Jenny. "He's going to sit on my lap," said Tracy, "so I can tickle him if he isn't good." Nick yelled, "No," in an angry voice. After they all sat down, Tracy picked him up to put him on her lap, but he just resisted. He did not want to sit in his load for 2 hours, but she was stronger. After she put him on her lap, she put her feet up on the back of the seat in front of her so he couldn't get away. He tried to wrestle her, but ended up only making it worse. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't even get his feet to touch the ground, and now the inside of his diaper was smeared. The show had now started and the teens were all clapping to the music. Nick couldn't take any more. He began to wrestle Tracy's legs, but they were too strong. All of the sudden Nick almost jumped out of his skin. Tracy had lifted his shirt and begun tickling his stomach. That was his most ticklish spot, but there was nothing he could do. She had the advantage. He became so ticklish and out of control that the other girls were beginning to think that she had dumped a bucket of ants down his diaper. All of the sudden Tracy stopped, and then there was a long pause. Oh. Tracy and Jenny turned and looked at each other. "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" "Yes, I smell poppy diapers, P. You," said one of the other girls, "smell it too." "I think he just pooped in his diaper." That's what I thought, said Jenny, and we don't have another one. Too bad, said Jill, he'll just have to spend the rest of the day in the one he's wearing. Just for that, I'm going to tickle you all over again, said Tracy. There was no longer a little boy before them, but an angry monster. They began to tease him, ha. Ha. You pooped your diaper. That made Nick angrier and he tried even harder to break free from his tickle torture. Nope, you're not going anywhere, little boy. Tracy continued to tickle him, which made his blood pump so hard that he began to get excited. As she was tickling him, he started to get an erection in his diaper. She would not stop and the other girls were still teasing. He was about to cream his diaper from his excitement. Then 3 of the other girls decided to team up and help Tracy tickle him. That was all he could take. Nick had an orgasm and came in his diaper while Tracy and the other girls were tickling him. Nick ended up spending the rest of the day in his poppy diaper and wore them all the way home. Nick's parents went on a lot of business trips when he was young. He always had young teenage girls watching him while his parents were away. The teenage girls that watched him all had 2 things in common. They always made him wear diapers, and they all liked to tickle him to death. By age 6 he began to like diapers. I think the underlying reason for this is the feeling he had at a young age through his experience with girls. The feeling of being defeated, such as when he couldn't get away from the girls, and being tickled at the same time mixed pleasure with incompetence. It is not surprising that he likes when girls make him wear diapers. This is how Nick's liking for diapers started. Dear Abby, my husband and I have been married about 2 years. We haven't had any children and do not expect any as a medical problem has made me unable to conceive. About a year after I married my husband, I went into the bedroom one morning to wake him for work and discovered he was sucking his thumb in his sleep. We laughed about it over breakfast, but over the next few months I caught him sucking his thumb several times. One day, for a joke, I bought a pacifier at the grocery store, intending to give it to him that night. After we undressed and went to bed, I gave him the pacifier, gift-wrapped in a small box. I told him I had found something to help him sleep. He gave me a curious look as he never had any trouble sleeping and opened his present. He laughed when he saw what I had given him, kissed me and put it on the bedside table. Imagine my surprise the next morning when I woke up and found him deep asleep with the pacifier in his mouth. I woke him up and kidded him about him liking his binky. He blushed, chagrined that I had caught him out in his odd predilection. He explained that he had always enjoyed sucking his thumb and had gone to great lengths to prevent me from finding out about his peculiar habit. I told him that I wasn't offended by his thumb sucking and that he was free to continue sucking his thumb in the privacy of our bedroom. Secretly, I thought he looked cute sleeping with his thumb in his mouth. It was only a month later, while reorganizing the attic, that the next incident occurred. I was going through some of his things in the attic, when I found a box filled with old toys and mementos from his childhood. I brought the box down from the attic intending to give the toys to charity. When he came home and saw the box, he asked me what I was doing with his things. I explained that I was trying to make more room in the attic and was going to give some of his old toys to charity. He became upset and took the box into the garage, saying he would find another storage spot for it himself. I followed him out to the garage, attempting to placate him by telling him I would never have given away any of his things without his permission. I explained that I understood his attachment to his baseball cards and pennants. I was aware of the fact that they were probably collector's items. I told him that I had only intended to give away some of the toys with no value, like the old tattered teddy bear I had found in the box. He clutched the one-eyed teddy bear to his chest and said he would never give away his favorite bear from his childhood. I smiled and told him that I hadn't understood how important it was to him and that I would not give it away. He put it back in the box reluctantly and I told him I would pack the entire box up and put it back in the attic. He calmed down and I took the box back up into the attic. The next day while he was at work, I went up to the attic and got the teddy bear. I thought restoring it would be a nice peace gesture to my husband for trying to get rid of it. I took it to a doll collector's shop and asked if they could clean and restore it without damaging it. They assured me they could and told me it would be ready the following week. I told them to be very careful about cleaning it as it was a family memento. When I picked it up the next week, it had been transformed, the fabric was clean and bright, the rips in the seams had been mended, the missing eye had been replaced with a matching eye, even the faded nose had been re-dyed. I was ecstatic about the results. It looked every bit like a collector's item, instead of the old battered bear I had wanted to dispose of. I tucked it under the covers on his side of the bed for him to discover when he went to sleep. When he found it, he said, "My teddy. What did you do to him? He's like new." I told him I had had it restored by a professional doll restorer. He hugged and kissed me in delight. He was so happy, he danced around the room in childish glee as he prepared for bed. I told him that since it turned out so well, it would make a daring bedroom accessory and that I planned to keep it on the bed from now on. He carefully stood it on his bedside table before getting into bed. Once in bed, he became extremely amorous and we made love for hours before we finally went to sleep. The next morning I found him sleeping with his teddy bear tucked in his arms and his pacifier in his mouth. He looked like a small child sleeping with his binky and teddy. He looked so sweet that I woke him with a kiss on his forehead. The next episode occurred when we were visiting some friends of ours who had a baby. We were playing bridge and my husband was dummy. He went into their kitchen to get us some more snacks and drinks. The hand went quickly and I went to help him with the tray, while my friend selected CDs to put on the stereo. I walked into the kitchen and found him bent over, his head buried in the refrigerator. I snuck up behind him to see what he was looking at. When I looked over the door, I saw him with one of the baby's formula bottles in his hand with the nipple in his mouth. He was sucking furiously at the bottle trying to get a quick taste before he was called back to the game. I watched him for a moment before he realized that I was standing there. He handed the bottle to me sheepishly and I rinsed off the nipple under the faucet and put it back in the refrigerator. I didn't say anything to him at the time, I only insisted that I drive the car on the way home. On the way home, I stopped at the grocery store and ran in for a few things while he waited in the car. When we got home, I took the groceries into the kitchen while he got ready for bed. I came into the bedroom and sat beside him on the bed where he was laying under the covers. I told him that I had been patient with his thumbsucking, his pacifier and his teddy, but I would not put up with that kind of behavior in front of our friends. He apologized for his lapse and I told him that if he wanted to drink baby formula that I would be happy to provide it for him. I reached around behind me, took a full bottle of warm formula from my rear pocket and gave it to him. He took it slowly from my hands and held it without drinking. I told him, "Come on baby, drink it. If you want formula so much you're willing to steal it from other babies, then I'll make sure you get it." He blushed hotly, put the nipple in his mouth and started to suck. I patted his cheek and told him he could have a bottle every night before going to sleep. I made him scoot down in the bed with his feet at the end of the bed, then got in the bed and cuddled his head against my breasts while he nursed the bottle. He shivered apprehensively at first, but after a few minutes, he settled down and contentedly finished the bottle. I made this a nightly ritual and I have been doing this for about a year. The last incident happened 6 weeks ago. I went into the bathroom as he was finishing his shower. I found him standing in front of the bathroom mirror modeling a towel. He had it tucked between his legs and was holding the ends together like a diaper. I laughed and told him how cute he looked, then coaxed him into letting me pin it on him. He was so enchanted by the result that he asked if he could wear it to sleep. I woke up in the early hours of the morning to find that he had wet the bed. He had saturated the towel pinned around him and then soaked the sheets. I woke him and asked him if he had ever wet a bed before and he confessed that he had wet the bed throughout his childhood until he was 13. I changed the bedclothes and made him go to the bathroom and pee before going back to bed. The next night, Friday night, I had a surprise waiting for him. I made him lay on the bed naked before turning it down. I told him to lay on his side as I slipped an adult incontinent diaper behind his bottom and had him roll over on it. I made him spread his legs and I diapered him while he trembled in humiliation. "You won't wet our bed again," I told him, "from now on you're sleeping in diapers." I made him get up and stand beside the bed while I turned it down. He looked startled when he saw that I had put a large incontinent bed pad covering his side of the bed under the covers earlier that day. I lay down on top of the bed and made him lay on the pad beside me, then slipped the nipple of his bottle in his mouth. I held him against me as usual while he nursed. The sight of him nestled sweetly against my breasts wearing only a diaper aroused my maternal instincts and I told him, "Honey, you need a mommy to take care of you. Don't worry baby, I'll be your wife and your mommy. You don't have to hide your needs from me. Mommy doesn't mind if you behave childishly. You can act as infantile as you want, you're my baby now." I pulled the diaper up over his bulging tummy and said, "You're going to be mommy's darling baby. Aren't you, honey?" He whimpered and I continued, "You'll suck your thumb, crawl on all fours, and make messes in your diaper. Mommy will pamper and coddle you just like when you were a baby." When he finished his bottle, I got out of bed and tucked his teddy into bed alongside him and put his binky in his mouth. When I got back into bed, he rolled over and buried his face in my breasts and sniffled. I comforted him by patting his back and diapered bottom while telling him I still loved him and would take care of him. His diaper was wet the next morning as I expected. I changed his diaper and rolled it up in the damp bed pad and threw it away. He moaned about being diapered and I told him, "Hush. Now that I know your secret, I'm going to treat you like a baby." He wept in shame and told me he was just playing, that he didn't really mean it. I laughed and told him that it was too late. I'd discovered what he really wanted in life. I kissed his forehead and told him he looked adorable in diapers. He'd just have to adjust to his new role. Then I made him spend the rest of that day in diapers. Since then, I've diapered him every day when he gets home from work. He spends his evenings wearing nothing but a diaper, crawling around the floor and playing with Lego blocks, while I sit on the couch knitting and watching TV. I'm sewing creepers, one-piece playsuits, and sleepers for him to wear when winter comes. I give him formula in baby bottles to drink with his meals. When I want to punish him, I take away his dentures and serve him baby food for dinner. Unless he's really naughty, then I spank him too. He loves this treatment and is completely submissive to my desires. The sight of him crawling around the floor in diapers, utterly in my power, is exhilarating. He looks so innocent and helpless playing at my feet. I've found I like the responsibility and feelings of trust his dependence gives me. I read him stories from Winnie the Pooh every night while he nurses his bedtime bottle and afterwards we make wild uninhibited love. Our love life has never been better, he's indefatigable. I'm happy and he seems happy, but I wonder, have I done the right thing? A life that changed forever. I was 13 when my parents got divorced. This was a very bad time in my life. I was very sad that they could no longer be together. The summer of that year I went to live with my mom. Things were going good, I made some friends and was fitting in. Still it could not make up for the fact that something was missing in not only my life, but mom's as well. Then something happened. I began to wet the bed at night. Mom was supportive and took me to see the doctor. She ran some tests and could not find any reason other than the stress of what happened to my mom and dad to be the cause. We went home and had a long talk. Mom explained why dad and her split up and it seemed to help a bit. I woke up dry the next day and thought cool, maybe it was a passing thing. July 4th I went to my dad's for a week and met his new girlfriend. It made me sad though. I mean she was a nice lady and all, but it was hard to accept seeing dad with a woman and kissing her like he used to do with mom. I wet the bed on the last day of my visit and dad just thought it was because I had too much to drink before bed. I came back to my mom's place and told her about the bed wetting and she was upset, but understood. The next few nights I would wet the bed and Mom was getting mad. Then one morning when I woke up wet, Mom said that she was going to have to do something about this. She sent me to go play and said she was going to the store and would be back in a few hours. She asked my friend Billy's mom to feed me lunch. Billy's mom said it would be fine and Mom went to town. Now we lived in a modest 3-bedroom house. The spare bedroom was used for storage and stuff. But this would all change soon. Chapter 2. After about 4 hours Mom called and said for me to come home for dinner in a few hours. I went home and was greeted at the door by Mom and she had a smile on her face. She said that she wished to discuss something with me over dinner. She made my favorite, tacos. She told me that she had an idea about how to keep the bed dry from now on and I was excited. I hated waking up to wet bed in the morning. But she said I would have to wait till bedtime to find out what the idea was. I called Billy and thanked his mom for lunch again and talked to him about what we were going to do the next day. We decided to go fishing. It was almost time for bed, so Mom said it was time to try her idea. She walked me to the spare bedroom and she opened the door. I could not believe my eyes. She had turned the room into a baby's nursery. I looked at her and asked why she did this. She explained that this was going to be my room from now on. I was in shock. I said, "But Mom, only babies sleep in a room like this." She said that is what I was going to be till I could stop wetting the bed. I was terrified. I wanted to run but Mom told me to get up on the changing table. I ran to the phone and called Dad and told him what was happening. He just said to do what Mom wanted and it was for my own good. I started to cry. I did not want to be a baby. Mom led me back to the nursery and helped me on the table. She started to explain that it would only be till I started to not wet at night. She took off my clothes and gave me a small sponge bath of my private area. Then she slid the diaper under me and did the tapes tightly, saying to me that she loved me and was sorry that it had to come to this. Then she got out a pair of plastic pants and a yellow sleeper. She put the pants on me and told me to stand up. She then put the sleeper on me and helped me into the crib. She gave me a good night kiss and said, "Sweet dreams, baby." I cried myself to sleep that night. Chapter 3. I woke up that morning soaked, but the crib was dry. Mom came in and helped me out of the crib and over to the table. She then changed me into a new diaper and dressed me into my regular clothes. I was upset and asked why I was in a diaper during the day. She explained that I was to be a baby all the time. I asked about what if my friends find out and she said not to worry, Billy's mom is the one who gave me the idea. Billy has the same problem wetting the bed at night. This did not make me feel better. So there I was in a diaper and being treated like a 2-year-old. And there was not much I could do about it. I went fishing with Billy and after about 20 minutes he asked me if I needed to be changed. I was shocked. He could see this and told me that it was okay cause he was diapered too. I asked if he liked it. He said in a way yes, he liked being cared for like a baby by his mother. He then said he had to go home for a change and once again asked me if I needed the same. I replied no and said that I would wait for him. While waiting I needed to go real bad. So I let go and wet the diaper. I was soaked and it started to make feel uncomfortable. Billy was back and I guess he could sense I was wet and said to go see his mom and she would change me. I was all like no way, but he said that his house was a lot closer than mine. I agreed and went to his house and knocked on the door. His mom answered the door and said to come in. She asked me if I needed a change and I said shyly yes. She led me by the hand to Billy's room and it was set up much the same as my new room was. Billy's mom cleaned me up and gave me a new diaper and said to come over anytime if I needed to be changed again. She said that my mom said it was okay. It was dinner time so I went home and ate dinner with Mom. She went over the rules with me about being diapered. I was to do all my duties in the diaper. I was like, even go poop. She said yes. I was shocked by this and she said there would be some more changes in the coming days. She got me ready for bed and tucked me in. She then gave me a bottle of warm milk and kissed me goodnight. I began to drink the bottle, accepting my situation, and began to admit to myself that I was enjoying this. Chapter 4. The days and weeks seemed to be just a blur. Other than the changes that Mom did about my treatment. Slowly but surely she was making me more and more her little diapered boy. She began to feed me from a bottle more often. She would have me dress in baby-type clothes at home. When we would go out she would bring a diaper bag with her. Then it was time for me to go back to school. I thought all right, I would get a break from being diapered. But this was not to be true. Mom had me in trainers for a day and we found out that I no longer had control of my bladder anymore. This was not supposed to happen, she told me. But I was not too upset and neither was she. I was enjoying being her little boy. But what was I to do about school? The others were sure to find out and I feared the worst. As luck would have it, Billy's mom was the school nurse and Mom got me out of gym class. Well, there is one problem out of the way. I would report to the nurse's office when I needed to be changed. School was going good for me. I was making friends and having a great time. Bridge game spanking. In my younger days I was spanked quite often in front of company. Misbehave in front of company and you'll get spanked in front of company. This was the general rule in our house during the 50s when I grew up. But this one time was by far the most embarrassing punishment I ever received that was witnessed by others. My mother was a member of a bridge club of 8 women that met every Wednesday in alternating homes. When they congregated at our home, one very hot, humid night in Kansas City, I was ordered, as usual, to stay upstairs and be quiet. I needed a glass of ice water real bad and risked going downstairs to get one. It was necessary to pass through the room where they had their card tables set up, wearing only underpants and my pajama bottoms. When I peeked in and asked permission to get the ice water, I was rebuffed and told to drink from the bathroom faucet. I said that the water was too warm and I wanted some water from the fridge. My mom was always very strict about talking back, so she called me to her and slapped my face, then sent me to the corner to wait until their current game was completed. I went immediately, without question, knowing from past experience it only made my punishment worse. Corner time always preceded an inevitable spanking. My mom and her friends continued their bridge game, all the while discussing how they each spanked their naughty children for talking back. I'm in the corner sweating from the oppressive heat and the coming spanking and listening to how some of their offspring got it much worse than I ever did. This continued for about the next 20 minutes. I heard how many spanks each of their offspring would get. What was the preferred implement was, in what position they were placed, and so on. My mom usually preserved a little of my modesty once she had me over her knees in front of company. It never occurred to me that my mom was inspired by their conversation to show off her spanking capabilities. After the game, she slid back in her chair and called me to her. I went meekly, begging her to forgive me and not spank me in front of everybody. This was to no avail. She continued to scold me thoroughly for about 5 minutes. She grabbed my arm and yanked me over her knees. Holding on, she began one of the fastest barrages of full-armed spanks she ever delivered to my clenching, squirming bottom. When I reached back for some respite, she spanked my thighs just as soundly. She would always say that me covering my bottom must mean I would rather get it on my thighs. My bottom definitely magnified the stinging to become completely unbearable. A normal spanking from my mom meant 40 hard spanks. The severity was determined by what she used. She used anything that was flat or flexible. Being caught in a lie about misbehavior would double the spanking. However, this was done with time in the corner between applications. This time she didn't stop. Mom kept up the furious volley of spanks till I lost count. It seemed to go on forever. I was told to stand up. Bawling from the spanking I had just received, I was told to go and fetch Mother's favorite wooden spoon. Shuffling, I went out to the kitchen to get the spoon. When I returned, the women were all commenting on how good a spanking my mom had administered. Mom informed them all that was just the beginning. I was sent to the corner again and ordered to hold the wooden spoon in both hands. This was whilst they all got refreshments. I stood there sobbing the whole time. When they all returned, I was again ordered front and center. Again my mom put me back over her knee. With the wooden spoon, Mom started in with a flurry of spanks all over my bottom and upper thighs. I soon forgot all about the 7 women watching whilst I kicked and twisted as much as possible. Mom slowed down to a steady, and harder, pace. She made certain that I was well and truly spanked. Scolding accompanied this stage, along with promises from me to never talk back again. When the spanking finally ceased, I was made to apologize to the women for disturbing them. I humbly and gladly exited the room when allowed. As I left the room I could hear the comments, all the way up the stairs about how well I had been spanked. An adult baby's evening prayer is answered. Shadows grew in the spaces between the pews as the last multicolored rays from the stained glass window muted, then dimmed into darkness. In the rear of the empty church in a part of town that was doomed to slip quietly into slums, a solitary man meditated. The priest came in, performed his office quickly and left, sensing that only someone who wanted to be alone with his God would be in this dilapidated church on a Wednesday night. The sun went down unnoticed as the man prayed for salvation from a fate he neither understood nor deserved. George was thoroughly disgusted with life. He sat in the church pew cataloguing the evils that had befallen him over the past half-year. 6 months ago he had discovered his wife in bed with his best friend. A fight had ensued and his wife had left him after emptying their personal bank accounts. His best friend, who was also his business partner, had disappeared a few days later. Within 2 months he had found himself the subject of an IRS audit. After an intensive investigation, the IRS concluded that his partner hadn't paid employees' Social Security and withholding taxes into the firm's accounts and had pocketed the money. That his partner had absconded with the money hadn't mattered to the IRS one whit. George was half owner of the company and therefore responsible for the money. The IRS demanded payment immediately. When he couldn't come up with the funds out of his looted accounts, the IRS seized his business and home and put them up at auction. The business had sold for less than 1/10 of its fair market value. His home, which was heavily mortgaged, had created a financial disaster. While it was true that it had sold for a greater percentage of its value, about 50% of its worth, the sale had merely created more problems. The bank demanded immediate repayment of the loan and had sued for the balance of the money from the sale. The money from the sale of his house had vanished like a dimly remembered dream. Even with the money the bank had gotten from the sale of his house, he still owed the bank $350,000. He had been forced to declare bankruptcy. The IRS had informed him that they considered the money that the bank had lost on his house to be income and they expected payments to be made on the taxes due. They told him they were willing to be reasonable. They understood that he had lost his business and was unable to make immediate payments. Quarterly payments would be quite acceptable, thank you. The agent had hinted darkly that if he did not make payments he could look forward to being a guest of the federal corrections system for a long time. George was beside himself. In the 6 months since he had discovered his wife cheating on him, he had been reduced to living out of an beat-up, old VW van parked in a vacant lot and working as a cook in a hamburger joint. There wasn't a prayer that he could pay the IRS the money they demanded. He would never be able to start another business, he decided. There simply wasn't enough time. He was 45 years old and had a well-documented heart condition. No one would hire him for anything but a minimum wage position. Just keeping himself fed was a struggle. The only way he could afford to buy his medications was to quit eating. He had gradually tapered off his heart medication until he had stopped taking it entirely. As a consequence, he was having angina attacks every night now and knew he would be dead by the end of the year. When George lost his job in the hamburger joint, he knew he had hit rock bottom. Only a miracle could save him, he decided, and he went into the run-down Catholic church near the vacant lot to pray. If only I had more time, he thought to himself. It's not that I couldn't do it, it's just that I don't have enough time. The bankruptcy didn't help. I thought it would make things simpler. Instead, it made things more complicated. I've been a good man. God, why did you let this happen to me? I never cheated on my wife. I never stole from anyone. I don't deserve this. Now the best thing I can hope for is to die before they send me to jail. If only I could be young again. I just need a fresh start. Just a few years of peace to get things together again. I'm not asking for much. I'm not asking to be wealthy. I just want to live a simple life, without having to worry about anything. Please, God, he pleaded earnestly, I just want to live the rest of my life with a good woman. Someone who will take care of me, someone I can love and trust absolutely. George heard the sound of a woman crying softly behind him. He turned and saw a well-dressed woman in her late 20s weeping bitterly into a handkerchief. He got up and sat quietly beside her. Is there anything I can do? He whispered sympathetically to the young woman. She shook her head and patted his hand. No, no one can do anything, she said morosely. I just thought, I had hoped that God would answer my prayers. But I see now that he can't. They're gone. Gone forever. Who's gone? He asked innocently. My husband and my baby, she said and broke down into shoulder-racking sobs. George put his arm around her shoulder and said, let me buy you a cup of coffee and we'll talk about it. He helped her up and they walked down the aisle of the deserted church. When they reached the threshold, he had the strange feeling that someone was watching him and smiling. He turned around to see who it was and saw only the crucifix above the altar. A warm feeling of well-being passed over him as he gazed at the crucifix, and him knew instinctively he had done the right thing in helping this young lady. Perhaps God was looking out for them both. He turned back to the door and helped her out of the church. When they reached the curb, he pointed out the coffee shop 2 blocks up the street. My name is George, George Sanders. We can go over to the coffee shop. It's not far, we'll walk. It's only 2 blocks away. The young woman glanced at where he was pointing and turned to look at him. Her eyes focused and she seemed to see him clearly for the first time. I don't think I can go in there, she said. I must look a mess. Look, my makeup has run, she said, presenting her handkerchief for his inspection. He looked at her handkerchief, then her face, and saw that the tears had made her mascara run in streaks down her face. She looked at his face intently and said suddenly, my name is Sandy. Something tells me I can trust you. My car is parked around the corner, would you like to come home with me for dinner? It wouldn't be any trouble. I have plenty and I hate to cook just for me. It would be nice to have company for dinner again. George nodded and accompanied her to her car. As they drove down the street, George saw a city wrecker hauling his VW away. He stared as his last possessions were stolen by a faceless, uncaring government. His clothes were in the van in a suitcase and he didn't have the money to get his van out of impoundment. He was homeless, totally destitute, without even a change of socks or underwear. He shook his head in utter disgust. He was at the end of his rope, he couldn't take any more. He would have dinner with this nice young lady, then walk downtown and throw himself under a moving bus. Or maybe I'll find a bridge to jump off. I really don't want to cause anyone any trouble. I just want this life to end, he mused silently. They reached her house quickly and she sat him in her living room while she made some coffee. She returned with 2 cups, handed him one, and sat down and drank a cup of coffee with him before saying anything. She had evidently washed her face in the kitchen. She had a freshly scrubbed appearance that made her look even younger than he had originally thought. When she had finished, she said, "You're down on your luck, aren't you? If you'd like to wash up for dinner you can use the bathroom in the hall. There's even a bathtub if you'd like to take a bath. It will take me about an hour to get dinner, there's plenty of time." He looked at her and saw the slight wrinkling of her nose as she suggested he take a bath. His sponge baths in the gas station weren't as effective as he'd hoped. I should take her up on her offer, he thought, at least I can die clean. George smiled, thanked her and said he would very much like to take a bath. She showed him down the hall and told him to leave his clothes on the bathroom counter next to the door. She told him to get in the tub, close the shower curtain and call for her when he was ready for her to take his clothes. She would wash his clothes while dinner was cooking. When George sat down to dinner, he felt almost human again. He was truly clean for the first time in a month and his clothes exuded a fresh sweet smell. She came in with a platter of chicken Kiev with green beans, almondine and new potatoes. They ate virtually silently, making only those comments necessary to civilized dining. When they had finished, she ushered him into the living room again with cups of coffee. They sat on the sofa and became acquainted. You said you were down on your luck, what happened? He told her his story while she made sympathetic clucking noises in appropriate spots. He looked at her and said, I've told you my story, if you'd like to tell me what happened to you, I'd like to hear your story. That's is, he added cautiously, if you want to talk about it. She told him that she had lost her husband and infant son in an auto accident 2 months before. I was at home baking a cake for my son's first birthday party. My husband went to the store to get some ice cream to have with the cake. It wasn't anyone's fault, the brakes failed on our car. The police said it was a 1,000,000 to 1 chance. My husband drove through a red light and was hit by a semi-trailer. They were killed instantly. She bowed her head and began weeping silently. George got up and patted her on the shoulder helplessly. He felt overwhelmed by the enormity of her loss. She composed herself after a few minutes and said, I miss them so much. I'm sorry I burdened you with it. George shook his head and said, please don't apologize. You have every right to cry. I wish there was something I could do for you. She looked into his eyes and said, I don't know why, but I know I can trust you. Would you like to stay here until you get on your feet? I have plenty of room. You can sleep on the couch, it unfolds into a bed. I've always hated to be in a house alone. Even when it was just my baby and me in the house when my husband, Fred, was on a business trip, I felt better to have someone, even a baby, with me. Would you stay? Please. George agreed reluctantly. He didn't want to be an imposition on anyone and told her so. They talked until after midnight when Sandy announced it was time for her to go to bed. She went to the linen closet and returned with sheets and a pillow. She helped him unfold and make the bed, then excused herself for the night. George undressed and hung his clothes carefully over the back of a chair he had placed near the daybed. He got into the bed gratefully, feeling emotionally wrung out. Perhaps his prayers had been answered. He would never have asked to stay the night, let alone stay until he got a job. This was certainly more comfortable than sleeping under a bridge. He turned out the lamp beside the sofa and fell asleep immediately. Sandy woke to the sound of someone groaning loudly in her living room. She was about to call the police when she remembered she had invited George to stay. His heart, she thought with alarm. He told me he had a heart condition, he might be having a heart attack. She threw on a robe quickly and dashed out to the living room. George, she called into the darkness, George, are you okay? George groaned again. She turned on the light and saw him flailing the bed under the sheets. He was completely covered by the bedclothes. She went to the side of the daybed and pulled the sheet off of his head. What she saw beneath the sheet stunned her into motionless silence. It was George, she was sure, but not the George she had had dinner with hours before. He lay in the bed thrashing about, his eyes open and unseeing, moaning in evident pain. What surprised her was his face. It wasn't the face of a 45-year-old man, but the face of a teenager. He couldn't be more than 16, she thought. She watched in fascinated horror as his face seemed to blur and melt into a still younger version of himself. She gathered her courage and pulled the sheet off of his body. His underwear hung loosely about his hips. He was draped rather than dressed in his underwear. They were twice as big on him as they should have been to fit him. He had the body of a prepubescent child. She was sure that if she looked beneath his briefs she wouldn't find any pubic hair. 12. 10. How old is he now, she thought to herself. Sandy drew the chair close to the bed and sat down. She knew all anyone could do for him was to watch him and keep him from strangling on the bedclothes. 10 minutes passed. His moans grew quieter and his thrashing gradually ceased. She reached over the bed and pulled the tent-like underwear down the legs of the 5-year-old laying in front of her. Sandy sat and smiled as his body miraculously transformed itself into the body of a 1-year-old baby. She sat unmoving and waited for an hour more to see if his regression had completed itself. What had he said he had prayed for? Oh yes, now I remember. He said he had asked God to be young again. He wanted to live a simple life, without having to worry about anything. He wanted to live the rest of his life with a good woman. Someone who would take care of him, someone he could love and trust absolutely. She picked him up and held him next to her breast, then carried him into the nursery. Sandy laid him down on the changing table and began to diaper him, thinking, I never told him what I was praying for in the church. He doesn't know I asked God to give me a baby to take care of. She chuckled quietly to herself at the irony of their situation. I guess God heard both our prayers. She finished diapering him and sat down in the rocking chair with him in her lap. After a while he opened his eyes and yawned, then stared up at her in confusion. George looked around in panic and tried to ask her what had happened to him, but all that came out was a baby's babble. He screwed up his face in frustration and began to cry. Sandy cuddled him close to her and said, Don't cry, baby. Mommy's right here. Don't worry, baby, Mommy will take care of everything. George wept bitterly at his predicament. Sandy carried him into the kitchen and put him in a high chair standing in the corner while she warmed a bottle of canned formula for him. When it was ready she carried him back into the nursery and sat back down in the rocking chair. He struggled fiercely as she pushed the bottle into his face and slipped the nipple into his mouth. He fought for a few moments more before his will broke and ability to resist drained out of him. He lay passively in her arms with the nipple between his lips. Sandy coaxed him into nursing the bottle and after a slow start, he was soon sucking on the nipple as if it was his first meal in months. When he had finished half of the bottle, Sandy eased the nipple from his lips and burped him. He looked up into eyes that beamed love down onto him. He smiled tentatively up at her and was rewarded with a maternal smile that promised that he would never have to worry about anything again. He glanced down at his diaper self-consciously. He was embarrassed by the implications of being dressed in a diaper. Surely she didn't expect him to use the diaper like a baby. This must be a dream. I haven't worn a diaper since I was a baby. But I'm not a baby, I'm a 45-year-old man. It must mean that she makes me feel secure. I guess my subconscious is telling me that I can trust Sandy, that she's a good woman, he decided. George yawned sleepily. The formula had had a soporific effect and his eyes drooped, threatening to close on their own. She started to put him in the crib for the night when she noticed he had wet his diaper. Did Mommy's little baby pee his diaper? She said, putting her fingers down into the front of his diaper. She put him on the changing table, quickly removed his diaper, then topped and tailed him. He grunted in surprise as she lifted his legs with one hand while slipping a diaper underneath his bottom. Sandy powdered him, then pulled the diaper up between his legs, stretching and smoothing it over his tummy. She fastened the tapes, then picked him up and put him in the crib, placing a teddy bear in his arms to keep him company. Sandy turned out the light and said, Sweet dreams, baby. Mommy will see you in the morning. George woke in the morning feeling cold and clammy between his legs. I must have perspired heavily during the night, he thought, reaching down to scratch himself. His hand caused a soft crackling noise when he groped himself. He was surprised to find that he was covered in a thick, plastic-covered garment instead of his underwear. The smell of baby powder was absolutely overpowering. He opened his eyes and saw he was in a baby crib. The very same crib he had been dreaming about. He sat up and looked around. He was in a nursery. He pulled himself to a standing position with the crib rails and stood looking over the top of the crib side. I'm barely tall enough to see over the side of the crib. What's happened to me? He looked down at the garment fastened to his waist and thought in shock, I'm wearing diapers. Did Sandy do this to me? He felt a fullness in his bowels which instantly vanished and was replaced by a warm feeling of release. He stood motionless in confusion for a moment before understanding of what he had done struck him. I've just shit in a diaper. I've lost control of my bowels. Suddenly he felt small, vulnerable, and helpless. I'm trapped in a baby's body in a nursery. The sense of helplessness overwhelmed him and he began to cry in anger and frustration. The door opened and there stood Sandy with a baby bottle full of tepid water in hand. She had heard his cries and was coming to take care of him. He screamed in outrage at the pain of his humiliation. Sandy picked him up and put him on the changing table and unfastened his diaper. He whimpered and turned his head to the side, unable to meet her eyes. She cleaned him efficiently and put a clean diaper under his bottom. Is that better, baby? Mommy is proud of her baby. He made a big poopy in his diaper. George glared at her in infantile rage. How dare she speak to me like that? I'm old enough to be her father. She tickled him on his tummy and made him smile in spite of himself. How is Mommy's baby this morning? Is baby thirsty? Does he want his BABA? She put the nipple of his bottle in his mouth and finished diapering him. She picked him up and sat down in the rocking chair with him, then propped him against her arm and held the bottle for him to drink. This is humiliating. She's forcing me to drink from a baby bottle. He would have liked to have thrown the bottle in her face, but he was scared of what she might do. He put the nipple between his lips and sucked tentatively at the bottle. The warm water entered his mouth and trickled down his throat. He realized that he was very thirsty and continued to suckle the nipple. Does baby remember what happened to him? He shook his head, no, while sucking on the nipple. Oh ho, so baby can understand what I'm saying. Do you remember that you told me that you prayed to be made younger? He nodded, yes. I never got a chance to tell you what I prayed for. I asked God to send me a baby. He's answered both our prayers. You've turned into a baby. My baby. You have to be fed and have your diaper changed like any other baby. Do you understand? He nodded, yes, again. I'm going to be your mommy. I'll change your dirty diapers and take care of you just like you were my very own. You won't have to do anything but act like a baby. It won't be hard. You'll see. In a couple of weeks you won't even remember your wife or your best friend. The IRS will never find you. You won't have to go to prison. If anyone comes looking for you, all they'll find is a diapered 1-year-old crawling on the floor. You'll have the perfect disguise. You'll be able to shout and scream at them all you want, they'll never catch on. You don't have to die, you're a healthy baby boy. I had a dream last night after you changed. An angel came to me and said you would never grow up. God has turned you into a baby for me to take care of. You'd always be my baby boy. Isn't that wonderful? You'll be Mommy's sweet baby forever and ever. Have I truly turned into a baby? Is she going to be my mommy? He thought in amazement. She took the bottle away from him and sat it on the floor next to the chair, then sat him upright and burped him. George blushed at the sound of his burp and tried to hide his head in the hollow of her shoulder. Sandy cooed softly at his display of childish dependence and patted his back to comfort him. She got up and put him into his crib and tucked him in, saying, "Now go back to sleep, Georgie. It's too early for you to be up. I'll come back and wake you in an hour or so, then I'll feed you a nice breakfast of strained oatmeal and eggs. Good night, honey." She bent over and kissed him on the forehead, then put a pacifier in his mouth before leaving the room. Georgie whimpered fretfully over what God had done to him, then began thoughtlessly sucking on the pacifier. The pacifier fell from his open mouth as he drifted off into a peaceful sleep and began to snore softly. Georgie woke to find himself being carried on Sandy's hip out of the nursery. He peered into the open doorways from a new vantage point. This was his home now and he wanted to see what was in every room they passed. Sandy carried him into the kitchen and strapped him into the high chair, then fitted the feeding tray over the arms of the chair. She stepped behind the chair for a moment and dropped a plastic bib over his head onto his chest. Sandy fastened it behind his neck and left him sitting in the chair while she went to the pantry. She returned with a feeding dish full of strained baby food and a white, rubber-covered spoon. Sandy pulled a dining chair up in front of the high chair and sat down facing Georgie. "Now Georgie," she said with a condescending tone in her voice, "Mommy expects you to eat every bit of this yummy breakfast. If you don't, Mommy will spank. Now open wide for the oatmeal choo-choo." Georgie screwed up his face with an expression of poorly concealed disgust and he opened his mouth expecting the worst. He concentrated on the ceiling, hoping the oatmeal would be as tasteless as it looked. Sandy ladled in the baby food and quickly followed it with another spoonful. Within seconds Georgie's mouth was full to overflowing with strained oatmeal. He closed his mouth and swallowed convulsively. Food dripped from his lips and dribbled down his chin. He opened his eyes wide at the taste. He liked it. The oatmeal had been mixed with something fruity that had a pleasant sweet tangy taste he couldn't identify. "This is good," he thought to himself in surprise. He opened his mouth eagerly for another spoonful and was surprised again when she spooned strained eggs into his mouth. "Eggs," he thought, "they're not as good as the oatmeal, but they're not bad. I wonder why people say that baby food tastes bad. I like this." He raised his arms exuberantly and managed to knock a large spoonful of baby food onto his lap. The wet splat sound it made as it hit the plastic of his disposable diaper seemed incredibly comical to him and he began to chuckle uncontrollably. Sandy smiled with maternal tolerance and continued to spoon the food into his laughing mouth until the dish was empty. She got up from her chair and left him sitting in his high chair, still grinning and chuckling over his funny breakfast. Sandy returned with a Polaroid camera and began snapping shots of him sitting in the chair, his face covered in baby food, grinning like a 12-month-old baby. "These will be the first pictures in your baby book, Georgie," she said, handing him a warm bottle of infant formula. He attacked it with relish. The sweet taste of the formula was ambrosial on his tongue. Georgie kicked his legs in delight at the taste of the formula. Deep down the last vestige of his adult mindset screamed at him to stop, but he was having much too good a time. He gurgled and bubbled happily as he guzzled down the infantile brew. Sandy snapped a few more photos, then put down the camera. She walked over to him, patted the top of his head affectionately and said, "That's Mommy's good boy. Mommy will get a washcloth and get you cleaned up. Mommy's very pleased with her baby boy." She returned and took the bottle from his hands and put it in the refrigerator, then scrubbed his face and hands with a damp washcloth. Sandy took the tray off of the chair and unstrapped him, then carried him into the living room and sat him down on the floor. Georgie looked around him in shock. "What's happening to me? I'm acting like a baby. Just because I'm in a baby's body is no excuse for behaving like that. Am I regressing mentally too?" He looked up at Sandy sitting on the sofa watching TV. "She's doing this to me," he thought. "She wants me to be her baby. She wants me to think like a baby as well as look like one. I'll show her. She can't make me act like a baby, I still have an adult mind." He looked down at the rug and was surprised to see that his right hand was next to his mouth with the fingers curling around the end of his nose. He suddenly realized he was sucking his thumb. He pulled his thumb out of his mouth guiltily and looked up to see if she had seen him. "Oh no," he thought when he saw the broad grin spreading across her face. His face clouded in disappointment and he began to cry in frustration. Sandy reached down with both hands and picked him up, then cuddled him next to her breast. He struggled for a few moments before relaxing in her comforting caress. He distantly heard her make soft noises to him without understanding what she was saying. She stroked the hair on his head and muttered, "It's okay, baby. Don't worry. Everything will be all right. He quieted and she returned him to the rug, then she sat down on the floor beside him to help him play. Sandy reached into the playpen, took out a hammer and peg set and placed it before him. She demonstrated putting the peg in the hole of the play table and drove it home with the plastic hammer. Georgie took the hammer from her sulkily and banged the hammer against the play table in a bored way. A peg laying underneath the table shot out and hit Sandy on the knee, startling her. Georgie laughed delightedly and banged again. Soon he was laughing and playing with the pegs as if they were his favorite toy. He crawled around the floor chasing errant pegs and giggled when they skittered away from his clumsy hands. Sandy laughed too, to see what a happy baby he had become. She ticked his bottom and tugged on his feet until his face was red with laughter. When his diaper became soaked and he piddled all over the rug, she laughed again and changed his diaper right there in the middle of the floor. She held him in her lap and said, "Can Georgie talk for mommy? Come on baby, try and say something for mommy." Georgie looked up adoringly into her eyes and said, Ma. Ma ma. Sandy bowed her head and kissed her baby sweetly on the top of his head. Georgie lay in her arms contentedly. He was home. His thought processes had regressed into infancy. He would never have to worry about anything again. She would take care of him. He trusted her more than he had ever trusted anyone in his life. He nestled his head against her breast and fell soundlessly asleep. He would never speak again, it wasn't necessary. His prayers had all been answered. ABDL game. Brian could not understand how he had managed it. After months of talking, he had finally conned his wife into playing baby games with him. He lay on the floor listening to her cooing softly to him. "The time for playing games is over, Brian. I've made your fantasy come true. You've been changed into a real baby, you'll be my baby boy forever and ever. You know I've always wanted a baby. I was so sad when I found out we couldn't have one. You should have told me before we got married that you were sterile. Since you can't father a baby, you'll take the place of the baby you should have given me," she teased. "You'll be my baby instead, so I'll have my wish too." Brian smiled at the thought of being her baby. Somehow just saying it had made it seem true. "Kathy's the perfect mommy for me," he thought as he recalled the events of the past 10 hours. She had diapered him before going to bed and held him while he suckled her teats like a baby. He had fallen asleep in her arms, his face nestled between her ample breasts. When he awoke in the morning, she had given him warm cocoa in a baby bottle and let him lie on the rug. He was surprised at the slightly bitter taste of the cocoa. He supposed that she had put in too much cocoa powder when she made it. Still, the sweet chocolatey mixture tasted good and the mildly cloying flavor brought back pleasant childhood memories. He sucked on his bottle and watched morning cartoons on TV while she sat on the couch and knitted. When he told her he needed to pee, she told him to go ahead and use his diapers. He relaxed and let himself dribble a little into his diaper. All at once, his control vanished and he found himself soaking his diaper like a toddler. Brian lay on his back and reveled in the feelings his warm diaper gave him. He felt the wetness spread over the front of his diaper and creep down between his legs, soaking his bottom. He seemed to pee endlessly. He couldn't have stopped even if he had wanted to. He imagined this was exactly how a baby felt while wetting. As he wet, he fingered the buttons on his soft flannelette nightshirt unconsciously as if he was a real baby. The flannelette shirts was another surprise of his wife's. True, the shirt was horribly tight across the chest and abdomen when it was buttoned, but the fabric felt like the same sort of textile that was used to make baby clothes. The flannelette was soft and warm and made it easy to imagine he was a baby again. She had made it herself, and although the dimensions across the chest and stomach was wrong for even his ultra-slim physique, she had made a number of changes to the pattern that made it seem more baby-like. The sleeves of the garment had been cut extremely close to the shoulder so that they were only 2 inches long. The shirt itself only barely reached the top of his diaper, leaving a babyish gap of 2 inches between the top of his diaper and the bottom of his shirt. He wriggled in delight at the sensation of the soft fabric preening the skin of his back as the flow of urine diminished rapidly and need to pee was replaced by another, more demanding physical urge. He glanced down at his diaper over his short-cut shirt and saw a huge bulge growing in the front of his diaper. He had gotten an enormous erection. The warm, wet fabric caressed his bottom and penis lovingly as he rocked his bottom against the squishy mass. Brian crooned softly to himself in a semi-conscious sexual euphoria. His low moan of ecstasy captured Kathy's attention and brought her quickly to his side. She picked up the bottle which he had dropped forgotten to the carpet and had begun slowly dripping cocoa on the rug. She looked down at her helpless husband, slipped 3 fingers beneath the top of his diaper and smiled strangely, then began to change his diaper. First, she opened the lower buttons of his shirt up to the top button of his collar and spread the inner corners of his shirt wide open so it wouldn't get soiled during the diaper change. He watched intently as she folded the triangular flaps of his shirt back and shivered in anticipation. When she unsnapped his plastic incontinent pants and unfastened his diaper, he moaned again in unbridled pleasure. Waves of ecstasy washed over him. He was dizzy with delight. The room seemed to telescope in and out around him. He had never been this horny before. His time sense speeded up and slowed down in cycles. One moment she seemed to be in slow motion, then the next moment her hands flitted about like a hummingbird's wings. She stroked the end of his penis lightly with the tips of her fingers before removing his sopping diaper. "Oh, Mommy. Mommy," he murmured in response to her touch. The room started to spin around him and he lay back on the rug abandoning himself completely to his passions. It was a dream come true. This was the experience, a magical, mystical journey beyond his wildest imaginings. This was transcendental. His back arched in a spasm of pleasure that made every muscle in his body quiver with strain. Brian climaxed, spurting cum from his turgid penis as she deftly caught it in his wet diaper. The orgasm seemed to last an eternity. He emptied himself into the moist diaper cupped around his balls and penis. He felt like his life, his very manhood was being drained into her hand. The conflicts and contradictions of his existence were resolved in one final moment of blissful rapture, leaving his inner child at rest and peace. He fell back on the rug, completely spent. His mind drifted in the afterglow while she picked up his legs and finished changing his diaper. She put her hand under his feet and was somehow able to hold both of them with one hand. He felt his legs being lifted off the soggy diaper beneath him, and somehow it felt peculiar, different from when he played baby alone. He supposed that the experience felt odd because this was the first time he had ever played baby with anyone else. He felt every inch a baby. Her joke about his fantasy becoming reality was tantalizingly close. She appeared so serious he almost believed her. Even though she was kneeling on the floor, Kathy appeared to tower over him, making him feel small and helpless. She radiated an aura of maternal self-confidence and power that he found both alluring and overpowering. He felt like she was transmogrifying him, that he had physically regressed into the baby he had always wanted to be. The sight of her smiling face hovering tenderly over him made him feel loved and secure for the first time in his adult life. "Kathy loves me," he told himself, "she'll take care of me. I shouldn't have worried about talking her into playing baby games. She looks like she's enjoying herself too. She doesn't seem to mind changing my diapers and letting me drink from baby bottles. I wonder if she'll bathe me when we're finished." As he lay on the floor musing about what she might do next, Kathy cleansed his pubes with a disposable baby wipe. Brian was astonished at how quickly she had adapted to the game. It was as if she, like him, had been waiting all her life to play. He was completely under her control. Brian delighted in the passive acceptance of her loving ministrations. He gazed up at her and saw not his wife, but the ideal mother he had needed, but never had. He realized with a mild shock that he was viewing Kathy from a child's perspective. Kathy was the personification of motherhood. She was awesome. Kathy seemed to grow in stature with every passing moment. The presence of his own personal mother goddess made it seem like the years of pain, worry and toil were rushing away from him. He felt like he was becoming even younger as she grew in maternal splendor. He was 2 again, then 18 months and finally only a year old. Even the furniture appeared to have become bigger. He wished she could pick him up bodily in her arms, cradling his diapered bottom with one hand and cuddling him to her bosom with the other. For the moment, he felt like he really had become her baby. He looked up at her and smiled languidly, thinking that they would have to do this again. Slowly, Brian realized that he had to be at work in 2 hours. It was a shame it had to end, he thought with a frown. "Mommy," he started to suggest that they should think about ending the game, but was stopped by the sound of his voice. The pitch had changed into a small child's and the rich masculine timbre had simply vanished. He even sounded like a baby. He had read of rare instances of voice shifts among transvestites and transsexuals. Was something similar happening to him? Was the experience of playing baby so total that he had convinced his subconscious that he was a baby again? If that was the case, his voice would shift back once they stopped playing the game. It's almost time for me to go to work, Mommy. Can I get up and change clothes when you're finished?" he piped. "No, darling," was her reply as she worked the overlarge shirt over his head and down his arms. "You hired a manager to run the business so you could have more time off, remember? You don't have to worry your little head about the business. She'll take care of everything for you. You'll never have to work again, sweetie," she added happily as she slipped the folded diaper under his bottom and pulled it up between his legs. "Yes, Mommy. I'll stay here and be your baby," he said agreeably. She doesn't want to stop either, he thought. It only takes me 15 minutes to get dressed and it takes another 15 minutes to drive to work. We can play another hour and a half before we have to stop. Besides, she's right. I'm the boss. I can be as late as I want. Marge can take care everything for me until I get there. I'm paying her to be the manager, aren't I? He lay back and luxuriated in the experience of being diapered by his wife and pondered, "I wonder where she bought these diapers. I've never seen anything like them. These aren't anything like the diaper I was wearing before. They have the same look and feel as flannelette diapers made for babies." Brian felt his legs pushed apart by the diaper's thick, soft folds. "These cloth diapers aren't as thin as the ones I've been using," he thought as she pinned one side of his diaper. "They're so bulky they make me bow-legged. If I try to walk, I'll waddle like a 1-year-old and fall. I'll have to crawl to the bathroom to change," he sulked. He reached over and picked up his glasses lying on the floor next to him. He had taken them off when he lay down on the floor to let her change his diapers. Holding them with both hands, Brian spread the arms off the glasses and put them on. The glasses promptly slid sideways off his nose and to one side of his face. Brian attempted to straighten them on his nose, only to have them fall on the other side of his face. He couldn't understand it, the glasses had become too big to fit his face. They were enormous. His wife smiled tolerantly at his feeble struggle to put on his glasses. He looked so adorable playing with them. She gently removed them from his face and put them on the floor behind her, saying, "You don't need these now, Brian. Babies don't wear glasses. Mommy will put these away for you until you grow up." The experience with his glasses had frightened Brian badly. Something was very wrong. He wanted the game to stop now. "I've changed my mind, Kathy. I don't want to play this game anymore. I want to go to work," he simpered. She smiled maternally and said, "It's much too late to change your mind, darling," then finished putting the last pin in his diaper. "You're a baby now and that's all there is to it. Don't worry, darling, it won't be so bad. We have plenty of money, you don't really need to work. You're just in a rut. Mommy has the cure for that. She'll keep you so busy with baby experiences you won't be able to get bored. Mommy will take you visiting and let you meet all of her friends' babies. You'll make lots of new friends your age. Mommy will buy lots of baby toys to keep you occupied. You'll see. You'll forget all about working. In a month or so you probably won't remember you ever had a job. Since this is your first day as Mommy's baby, Mommy has something special planned for you. This afternoon, I've invited some of my friends to bring their babies here for you to play with. I want all my friends to see what a darling baby I have. Mommy will dress you in a diaper and baby blue panties and nothing else so Mommy's friends can see your cute little body. You'll look so adorable crawling around the floor in your diapers with the other babies. You can watch the other babies and learn to crawl and suck your thumb just like all of Mommy's friends' babies. Mommy wouldn't want you to feel out of place when she takes you visiting. We'll put you in a playpen with the other tots where you can act as babyish as you want. Won't it be fun to stand at the side of the playpen and pee your diaper in front of everyone? Mommy will pretend she's busy and ask one of her friends to change your diaper. You've always been so proud of your masculine endowments. Now everyone will be able to see just what you've got. If you're good, Mommy will let you stay out of the playpen to visit with her friends. They'll bounce you on their knees and tickle you and make a big fuss over you. Isn't that what you've always wanted? Maybe one of Mommy's friends who is nursing will give you a little titty. You'd like that. Mommy knows how much you like to suck on Mommy's titties. Her mocking tone piqued Brian and he decided to end the game once and for all. He wiggled and kicked his legs in a futile attempt to get up and change for work. He couldn't get up. What had happened to him? He grabbed her hand to pull himself up and was shocked to find he could barely grasp two of her fingers in his fist. He stared at his hand next to hers. It had shrunk. Instead of an adult male hand holding hers, there was only a tiny baby's hand less than half the size of hers grasping her fingers. He really was a baby. She wasn't kidding. Oh my God, he thought in sudden realization. She put something in the cocoa that regressed me into babyhood. He was completely in her power. She hadn't been feeding him that malarkey just to titillate him, she really intended to humiliate him in front of all her friends. She'd make him play on the rug with her friends' babies wearing nothing but a diaper. He grimaced in annoyance. He knew that sooner or later he'd have to pee in his diaper. In a room full of mothers, a wet diaper would be noticed immediately. Within minutes everyone would be laughing at his childishness. He'd never be able to look them in the eye again. He saw her scheme now. She planned to break his spirit so she would have a weak, pliant baby to mother. He looked up into her face in desperation and saw the triumphant grin on her face. Kathy removed her fingers from his grasp and watched him kick his legs petulantly in the air. He looks so winsome when he's worried. The girls will think he's enchanting, she thought. It was obvious from his expression that Brian understood the full implications of what she had planned for him this afternoon. Good. The sooner he accepts his new role the better, Kathy thought. Once he appreciates the fact that he really is a baby again, he'll be much easier to take care of. Until then, I'll have to watch him carefully to make sure he doesn't try to run away. Kathy giggled at the thought of him crawling furiously down the street trying to escape her care. He wouldn't have a chance. Any woman who saw him would stop and retrieve him for her. He'd discover that he now inhabited a world populated by adult women and their helpless babies. Kathy wondered how long it would be until she had to paddle him. Not long, she suspected. He'd soon learn that she was the mommy and he'd do as she said. Kathy smiled in anticipation. She was enjoying her role as his firm but loving mommy. Please, Kathy, he wailed pitifully, don't show me to your friends. I don't want to play the baby game anymore. She took on a serious expression and she said, being a baby is not a game, sweetheart, as you're about to find out. You'll sit in your playpen quietly while mommy talks to her friends. You'll discover how frustrating it is to be a bystander while someone else makes decisions for you. I can picture you now, sitting in your diaper, slobber dripping off your chin, while my friends and I discuss which daycare center I should enroll you in. He shuddered at the thought of being enrolled in a daycare. No, Kathy. I don't want to go to a daycare, he sniveled. Poor baby, she told him mockingly, Doesn't mommy's little baby want to go and play with all the other babies in the daycare center? Mommy will pack your diaper bag with lots of clean diapers and panties. She'll even put in some baby food and formula for your lunch. You'll be able to play all day without having to worry about nasty old work. You'll even get to take a nap after lunch. Just think, a daycare is a place run by women whose only job is to pamper you. There'll always be someone there to take care of you when you need something. I don't need anyone to take care of me, he whined. Of course you do, honey. You're an infant. You have to be nurtured and cared for like any other infant. Babies are completely dependent on their mommies for everything, just as you are now. You needn't be embarrassed about having to wear diapers in front of strangers. You'll see that women don't think of babies as rational humans, they're only small, helpless creatures who have to be looked after. And babies need to be taken care of, they can't take care of themselves. They have to be fed, dressed, bathed and have their diapers changed and their dirty bottoms cleaned. Besides, you don't have any say in the matter. Babies aren't allowed to make choices, their mommies make all the decisions for them, all the way down to the food they eat and the clothes they wear. Every woman knows that her baby is just an adorable little living doll to dress up and show off to other mommies. That's why their mommies find the cutest, most adorable clothes for them, no matter how silly and foolish it makes them look. No one cares about a baby's opinion. It won't be long before you think that peeing and pooping in your diaper is the height of your day. You'll love messing in your diapers. No one will be surprised to see you standing in your playpen and giggling while you take a dump in your diaper. Of course, as a baby, you'll have no privacy, personal or otherwise. If someone thinks you've peed in your diaper, then they'll stick their fingers down your diaper to check. If your diaper is wet or dirty, then off it comes in front of everyone. Everyone knows that babies have no sense of modesty. That's why their mommies let them toddle naked around the house in front of everyone. There's nothing quite as enchanting to a woman as watching a baby's adorable little tush as he totters away from her. If it's a naked little boy, so much the better. A baby boy's wee-wee isn't vulgar, it's only sweet. I know my friends will think your little wee-wee is adorable. She shook her head ruefully and said, "No honey, you won't be playing the baby game anymore. You've become an actual baby. You're going to be mommy's precious little baby for the rest of your life." She tickled his tummy, making him wriggle convulsively. The thought of spending the rest of his life as a helpless, dependent infant made him shiver in terror. "Please Kathy, don't make me stay a baby. I'm a man. Please don't diaper me," he began to sob. He watched in horror as she put her hands through the leg holes of a pair of soft white plastic baby panties and slipped them over his feet, sliding them down his legs and over his knees. He kicked his legs in impotent frustration and whimpered through his sobs, "I'm not a baby. Take them off. Please Kathy, I'll be good. I'll never ask to play baby again." Ignoring his protests, she smiled a motherly smile and gently shook her head no while pulling the panties over his diaper. She tucked the edge of the panties over the top of his diaper. "There you go, darling. These will keep your diaper from leaking. We wouldn't want you to pee all over your nice new shirt, would we?" she said, patting the front of the bulging panty-covered diaper. "Please Kathy, change me back, I don't want to be a baby," he bawled. He continued to cry as she drew the bottom of his diaper shirt up between his legs, fastened it at his waist and picked him up. His wife held him to her with one hand under his bottom supporting him and the other around his back. She looked at him sadly and said, "I'm sorry, honeybunch. Only time can make you a man again. That is, if I don't decide to regress you into a baby again in a few years." His weeping became an uncontrollable wail as he realized she would never let him grow up. She intended to keep him as her baby forever. This wasn't his fantasy of being cared for by a loving mommy. Somehow what had started as a pleasant daydream had been turned into a horrible, twisted nightmare. He sobbed hysterically as she paced the room and made sympathetic noises while patting his back and comforting him. When he quieted, she took him into his den next to the master bedroom. Brian was shocked to see she had redecorated it as a baby's room, complete with dressing table and crib. Everything that had made it his den, his final place of refuge against the outside world, had been stripped away. His cluttered, disorganized bookcases were gone. The old, dark, masculine decor had been transformed into a light, airy, nursery atmosphere. The walls had been repainted a light blue-white and a border of cute baby bunnies scampered around the room at chest height. In place of his crammed filing cabinets, he saw a changing table fully stocked with baby powder, wipes, and stacks of clean diapers. His comfortable, tattered easy chair had vanished. In its place was a large wooden rocking chair with a baby blue receiving blanket neatly folded and draped over the back. The dingy reading lamp in the corner by the chair had been replaced with a brand new folding playpen propped neatly against the wall. Even the musty smell of stale pipe tobacco and slowly decaying books had been commuted into the fresh scent of baby powder and clean diapers. She sat down in the rocking chair with him on her lap and propped him against her arm. She took a baby bottle from her rear pocket and pushed the nipple into his mouth. Brian struggled against her briefly, then became limp in utter defeat. "Come on, honey," she said, "drink your formula for mommy. Be a good baby and suck on your BABA." He suckled slowly, hoping that she would tire of this game and let him be a man again. As the formula trickled down his throat, Brian realized how hungry he was. He was surprised at how good it tasted. He had always thought baby formula would have a disgusting flavor. It made his stomach feel so warm and, well, comfortable. The feel of the nipple in his mouth was strangely consoling. He began to suck on the nipple eagerly and was amazed at how quickly he finished the bottle. She took the empty bottle from his hands, burped him, then put him into his crib and tucked him in. Within minutes, the combination of emotional exhaustion and the warm formula had put Brian in a deep slumber. She bent over the crib and tenderly stroked his hair amid his soft snores, then blew him a kiss before turning, picking up the playpen and carrying it out of the nursery with her. When he awoke, he discovered that he had been sucking his thumb in his sleep. He pulled it out in disgust and pushed against the mattress to get up on his knees. When he rocked back on his heels, his diaper squished wetly between his legs. He had peed his diaper in his sleep. The weight of the diaper pulled at his waist. He hadn't just peed a little, he had soaked it. If he hadn't been wearing the plastic panties, he would have soaked his clothes and bed as well. He cried softly for a while in frustration, then decided to ask his wife to change him. It was humiliating, but he didn't know what else to do. He called out to her for help and was surprised to find that instead of a loud shout he could only make small gurgling baby noises. He was losing the ability to speak. Brian screamed in infantile fury, screaming his rage at what his wife had done to him. "Kathy had no right to do this to me," he thought, "it was only a game. I didn't mean it. How could she do this to me? I'm her husband, not her baby." She entered the room and beamed down at him. "I see my little sleepyhead has woken up. Does mommy's baby need his diaper changed?" She lifted him out of the crib and took him over to the changing table and laid him on his back. Within minutes, she had removed sodden diaper and was cleaning his bare bottom. "I've been going through your old things this morning, Brian. Since they won't fit you now that you're a baby, I'm going to give away all your old clothes to the Salvation Army." He noticed she was looking at him intently, her eyes seeming to bore into his head, searching for confirmation of something she already knew. "By the way, Brian, I found all your DPF stories last week in your filing cabinet. You know what else I found, baby? I found a hypnosis tape to turn you into a bedwetter." She chuckled and said, "I guess you won't need that now. I also found a suitcase full of baby clothes, plastic pants, and diapers in adult sizes. I'm going to send everything back to DPF. Except for the adult diapers," she smiled broadly, "they'll make good lap pads." Brian's head spun in panic. She had found his books and adult baby clothes. He'd never convince her that it was just a game he had recently invented. She had known about everything before he had talked her into playing with him. He wanted to escape, to find somewhere to hide from her thoughtful gaze. She knew everything he had been doing in secret all these years. He moaned in shame. There had to be somewhere he could go, someplace where no one knew about his desires. Someplace safe where nothing would hurt him. His head reeled and he closed his eyes hoping it was all a bad dream. Maybe if he explained to her about his love of diapers, that what she had found was just a harmless hang-up. He decided that if he spoke slowly and enunciated clearly, he should still be able to talk, but when he tried all that came out was, do, gara. Do bag. She snickered and said, Bree has already forgotten how to talk, hasn't he? Hush baby and be still while mommy finishes changing your diaper. He squeezed his eyes shut as all the petty humiliations of his babyhood returned to him. He was drowning in his memories. There had to be some escape. He felt nauseated and dull, unable to think. The thick-wittedness was gradually replaced by a tranquil serenity which spread like a soft, woolly baby blanket, snuggling his mind with a feeling of warmth and security. He tried to fight it, but he lacked the mental strength to resist. He closed his eyes and relaxed on the changing table in submission. A rivet of baby slobber dribbled from the side of his mouth as he relinquished his awareness to this new feeling. There you go baby, she said as she pulled a clean set of panties over his diaper. She picked him up from the changing table and stood him in the crib. Mommy will be back in a few minutes, honey. She's going to make you a nice breakfast of baby cereal and formula. Why don't you play in your crib with your stuffed animals until mommy gets back? Brian looked around the crib in confusion. The sides were lined with fuzzy plush toys just begging to be hugged. He picked up a stuffed rabbit and rubbed its velveteen fabric against his face absently. He smiled in unconscious enjoyment and softly cooed. A wave of dizziness struck him and he clutched the crib rail to keep from falling. Brian frowned in thought. There was something he had wanted, someplace he had wanted to go. He couldn't remember. He drooled and tried to snatch at a sunbeam that sparkled in front of his face. It was too difficult to try and concentrate on anything for too long. Everything looked so new and wonderful. He felt a strange urgency behind him. He bent his knees and allowed the pressure that had been building within him to release. Brian grinned childishly as the soft baby poop oozed from his behind and began to fill his diaper. Kathy returned and upon seeing the expression on his face asked, Bree honey, what are you doing? Brian gazed at her quizzically and said, Kara. Kathy smiled gently and asked, is Bree trying to say mommy's name? Babies aren't supposed to call their mommies by name. I'm your mommy now. Try and say mama for mommy. Brian pursed his lips with a look of intense concentration, then raised his arms and gushed, CA, 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 grinning gleefully in success. Kathy looked surprised, then mouthed a silent "oh" of sudden understanding. She laughed and said, that's mommy's good baby, then bent over to kiss his forehead. She took him out of his crib and settled him on her hip with one leg in front and the other behind her. Mommy will change your diaper after you've eaten, sweetie pie. Right now, it's time to feed Bree his first breakfast as mommy's baby, she said as she carried him to the kitchen. Bree bubbled his joy as he saw the brightly colored high chair waiting to receive him into his new life. Necromancer. The planets were aligned, the hour had arrived, the circle was drawn. Everything was in readiness for the spell of evocation. On the altar lay the consecrated tools of a magician inscribed with strange runes, a wooden wand, a dagger, a chalice of wine, an aspergillus filled with an infusion of herbs for banishing spirits, a small dish of salt, and a thurible issuing forth clouds of smoke from the burning incense within. All these things had been carefully prepared according to the tradition of the Lemagedon and waited for the rite to commence. Beginning in the east, Dick circled around the room lighting the candles on the tall candlestands. An unseasonably cold north wind beat on the window's panes as he began to chant his notes, I invoke and conjure thee, O Spirit for us, and, fortified with the power of the Supreme Majesty, I strongly command thee by Barolamensis, Baldachiensis, Pormachi, Apolloricides, and the most potent princes Genio, Laicide, ministers of the Tartarian seal, chief princes of the seat of Apologia in the 9th region, I exorcise and command thee, O Spirit Foras, by him who spake and it was done. By the most holy and glorious names Adonai, El, Elohim, Elohe, Zebaoth, Elion, Eschers, Jah, Tetragrammaton, Shaddai, do thou forthwith appear and show thyself unto me, her before this circle, in a fair and human shape, without any deformity or horror, do thou come forthwith, from whatever part of the world, and make rational answers to my questions, come presently, come visibly, come affably, manifest that which I desire, being conjures by the name of the eternal, living and true God, Heliorem, I conjure thee also by the particular and true name of thy God to whom thou owest thine obedience, by the name of the King whom thou owest thine obedience, by the name of the King who rules over thee, do thou come without tarrying, come, fulfill my desires, persist unto the end, according to mine intentions. I conjure thee by him to whom all creatures are obedient, by this ineffable name, Tetragrammaton Jehovah, by which the elements are overthrown, the air is shaken, the sea turns back, the fire is generated, the earth moves and all the hosts of things celestial, of things terrestrial, of things infernal, do tremble and are confounded together, speak unto me visibly and affably in a clear, intelligible voice, free from ambiguity. Come therefore in the name of Adonai Zebaoth, come, why dost thou tarry? Adonai Shaddai, King of Kings, commands thee. Dick concluded the chant, picked up the thurible in his right hand and sensed a large triangle chalked on the floor and inscribed with Hebrew words. This triangle of art was where the spirit he had called was expected to materialize. Behind the triangle sat a cruse or chafing dish filled with a freshly kindled charcoal fire. He replaced the censer on the altar, took a handful of mixed herbs from a bowl on the altar and threw it into the cruse. A mushroom cloud of smoke immediately arose from the blazing fire and permeated the atmosphere with its noxious fumes. When the spirit did not appear, he repeated the chant from the beginning and threw another handful of the aromatic on the fire. When the spirit failed to appear for a second time, he threw a handful of aromatic on the fire first before rechanting the conjuration. The effect was immediate, the room became freezing cold as smoke from the cruse was sucked into the center of the triangle and began coalescing into the shape of a man. A few moments later, the naked form of a well-muscled man with a thoughtful expression was standing in the triangle of art. Dick stepped forward and hailed the spirit warmly with the traditional greetings, "Welcome, most estimable President, welcome art thou unto me. I have called thee through him who created heaven, earth, and hell, with all contained therein, and thou hast obeyed, also by the like power. I bind thee to remain affably and visibly before this circle, within this triangle, so long as I need thee, to depart not without license, till thou hast truly and faithfully fulfilled all that I shall require." The spirit regarded him with baleful eye and said tiredly, "What wilt thou have of me?" Foras looked deeply into Dick's eyes before answering, then spoke, "The eyes of a man bear witness to the truth his soul holds. There is no deception in thy eyes, mortal. I shall grant thee thy wish. The carefree days of thy youth shall be restored." Foras made a small gesture with his hands and said, "The process has begun. Think not to curse me for the suffering thou shalt endure, for it is out of thy own mouth that this fate was decreed. Release me, mortal. I tire of thy presence." Dick raised his hands and spoke in a loud voice, "O Spirit Foras, because thou hast diligently answered my demands, I do hereby license thee to depart, without injury to man or beast. Depart, I say, and be thou willing and ready to come, whensoever duly exorcised and conjured by the sacred rites of magic. I conjure thee to withdraw peaceably and quietly, and may the peace of God continue forever between me and thee. Amen." The spirit shrieked with a horrible tearing laugh as it vanished. A whirlwind filled the room, tearing pictures from the walls and scattering his notes across the room. He covered his ears to shield them from the noise as the windstorm surrounded him. The whirlwind tightened and sped up, enveloping him like a second skin. He was blinded and deafened by the assault on his face and ears. His mouth and nose were filled with the taste and smell of ancient musty dust as the whirlwind entered him and compassed his being in the storm. He tried to scream, but the noise was forced back down his throat. He ran to the door in terror, trying to escape the onslaught. He could hear the spirits laugh in the roar of the whirlwind. He opened the front door and leaped out onto the porch. The door slammed and latched behind him. The noise abated instantly. He was standing stark naked on his porch in the dead of winter. A brisk northern wind chilled him to the bone, and he decided that it was probably safer to re-enter the house than to remain out in the wind and risk death by exposure. He stepped up to the door and noticed something strange. The doorknob had moved up on the door. It was above eye level. He grasped the knob with his hand and found that he could no longer put his hand around the knob. It had grown. He seized the knob with both hands and tried to turn it, but it wouldn't budge. He was growing colder with each passing moment. He had to get into the house. He went over to the porch chairs, thinking he would throw a chair through the window and gain access, but the chairs had gotten bigger. He ran to his car and found that it had enlarged too. He tried to open the car door, but the height of door lock defeated him. He looked at the car and house and the down at his hands. The house and chairs hadn't grown, he had shrunk. He pulled the side mirror down and gazed into it, hoping to see what had happened to him. A child's face gazed back out of the mirror and filled him with dread. The spirit had overdone it. He had been rejuvenated into a tot. A new feeling of terror came over him. He had become a small child and he would die from exposure unless he got into some warm clothing or was able to find shelter from the wind and cold. He decided he would try to get into the next door neighbor's house down the hill. He didn't want to be seen in this condition, so he clambered down a back path hidden from the road. The path was an easy downhill slope, but he found that it was becoming more difficult to keep from falling with each step. He approached the neighbor's house from the rear to observe it before attempting entry. His neighbor, Dorothy, was taking down the wash from the clothesline. He sat motionless in the bushes with his teeth chattering, waiting for her to take the full basket and go inside. The phone rang in the kitchen and she left the clothes basket on the ground while she went to answer the phone. He made a mad dash for the basket the minute that she was out of sight. He rummaged through the clothes trying to find something that would fit him. He was dismayed to find that he had seemed to have grown even smaller. The basket came up to his waist and nothing seemed to fit him. He draped himself with a cold beach towel when someone grabbed him under the armpits from behind. A soft feminine voice asked angrily, "And just what do you think you're doing in my clean laundry?" He huddled under the towel and shivered mutely in cold and fright. "Why, you're freezing. Where's your mommy?" He looked up at her, struck dumb by fear. She knelt in front of him and asked, "How old are you, baby? You don't look like you're more than 3 years old. Do you know where your mommy is?" "Well, you can't stay out in this cold with no clothes on. We'll find your mommy later. I'm going to take you inside and warm you up. You're turning positively blue." His nose and cheeks were turning a pale grey with the cold and she was worried he might have been frostbitten. She wrapped him in the beach towel and took him inside. She carried him into the bathroom and began filling the tub. While the tub was filling, she examined him for signs of frostbite or abuse. When the tub was 1/3 full, she put him in the water. The lukewarm water began warming him immediately and she poured water over his head to speed the process. She rubbed his arms and legs briskly with her hands, producing an intensely embarrassing erection. "Does baby like Dorothy's massage?" she said playfully. After his skin had warmed to the touch, she lifted him from the bath and dried and wrapped him in a towel. She picked him up and held him in her arms against her chest facing backwards, and carried him down the hall. They entered a room and she sat him down facing her, still swaddled in the bath towel. "You looked older when I brought you in from the yard," she said thoughtfully, removing the towel and laying him down naked on his back. He felt a warm sheet underneath his body. He was evidently on a mattress of some kind. "I guess the cold made you look different, but you look smaller than you did a few minutes ago. You can't be more than 1.5 years old," she said. Dick gazed back at her smiling face and realized she had been looking at his pubes as she had made the last statement. Dick, already feeling vulnerable from his helplessness and nudity, was humiliated by her observation. He looked nervously from side to side to see where he was, and was horrified to see that he was lying on a crib in a nursery. He squirmed in embarrassment as she proceeded to put him in a disposable diaper. "Now be still, baby, I'll be done in a moment," she chided. When she was finished, she picked him up and carried him into the kitchen. She put him in a high chair and strapped him in securely. She went to the stove and put a pot full of water on to heat, then went to the cupboard and removed a can and jar. She emptied the jar into another pot and put it on the range to warm, while she prepared the can. She opened a drawer and withdrew something and returned to stand behind the high chair. She put a cloth around his neck and tied it. He looked down and was mortified to see that it was a feeding bib. She intended to feed him. She went to the stove and filled a bowl and brought a chair to sit in front of him. She took a spoonful and put in his mouth. It was warm, sweet, and perfectly smooth. He ate his third spoonful before he realized that he was eating ground oatmeal. She was feeding him baby food. She spooned food into his mouth until his mouth was so full, cereal dripped from his lips and ran off his chin. The thought of eating baby food repelled him, but under the circumstances he had no choice. As he tried to swallow the oatmeal, he felt the front of his mouth with his tongue and discovered that he only had a couple of teeth. He couldn't have eaten regular food if she had given it to him. He decided it didn't taste bad, it was just that eating baby food was unseemly. The entire episode was getting out of hand. He needed to get back to his house and review his notes to see if he could make the demon reverse the spell. She was convinced he was a baby and who knew what would happen if he stayed here much longer with her. He decided he would behave himself until she grew careless and he was able to slip away. The bath and the hot food restored his lost body heat. He was feeling comfortable in spite of his surroundings. She continued spooning food into him until the bowl was empty, then took the bowl and spoon and went to the stove. She took an object from the pot and dried it, then returned and stood in front of him. She put the nipple of a baby bottle filled with warm formula into his mouth. He gulped involuntarily, filling his mouth with formula. This was horrible, sitting strapped in a high chair, wearing nothing but a diaper and drinking formula out of a baby bottle. "I have to get out of here," he thought. She watched him drink the formula for a few minutes, then went to the kitchen phone. "Don't worry, baby, I'm going to call the sheriff. He'll find your parents," she said pleasantly. Dick panicked. If the sheriff took him, they would put him in a foster home. He dreaded the thought of what would happen when the spell wore off. He had to stop her even if he had to reveal his identity. "Please don't call the sheriff," he plained. She turned in shock and said, "You can talk. What are you, some kind of midget?" "No, I'm your next-door neighbor," he said. She looked at him in disbelief and said, "That's impossible. I don't know him very well, but I've seen him and he's full-grown, almost 6 feet tall." He explained that he had conjured a demon and what had happened to him. When he had finished, she said, "That's the wildest thing I ever heard. Do you really expect me to believe that cock and bull story? You're some kind of crook. I'm calling the sheriff. Please. Please. Please believe me. We can go over to my house and you can see for yourself. I can tell you where everything is in the house, in every closet and drawer before we go over there. I'll prove it to you. My name is Dick Chalmers, my social security number is 575-16-1424 and my telephone number is. Oh, no, he moaned and started to cry. She stood in shock for a moment and then a quizzical expression came over her features. She took the bottle from his hand and removed the tray from the high chair. She looked down at him while he sobbed. She hesitated, then put 3 of her fingers down into the front of his diaper. "Did you wet your diaper?" she demanded. I can't help myself," he sobbed. "I'm losing control of my body. Her expression softened and she said, "I'm not going to call the sheriff, at least not for the moment. It's obvious at least part of your story is true. I doubt that a midget would wet himself and then cry like a baby just to try and fool me. Now, calm down while I get something from the closet. I'll be right back." His crying had quieted to sniffles when she returned and began setting up a video camera on a tripod. "Now I want you to tell your story again in front of the camera. If you don't, I'll call the sheriff immediately. Do you understand me?" He nodded and retold his story. She prompted him for personal details about his house whenever he started wandering. He was losing the ability to concentrate and kept looking down at his diaper and weeping. "Are you finished? Is that all?" she asked. "Yeef," he lisped. She stared at him, realizing that he was losing his ability to talk. He frowned, looking down with an expression of intense concentration on his face. He looked up at her, then his expression changed to surprise and he started to cry again. "Well, what's wrong now?" she demanded. He stumbled, his face blushing crimson in embarrassment. The smell of a dirty diaper assailed her nostrils. She smiled broadly and said, "Did you poop in your diaper?" He nodded miserably. "Well, I need to change clothes before we go over and check out your house. Finish your bottle while I go change and I'll change your diddy when I get back," she said confidently, putting the bottle in his hands. "Please, change me now," he begged. She looked down at him sternly and commanded, "Finish your bottle." "Please," he wailed pitifully. "If you don't put that nipple in your mouth right now, I'm going to call the sheriff. You'll go with him, dirty diaper and all." He quailed at the thought of being taken into custody in this condition. She would tell them what had happened and they would laugh and joke about his predicament. He put it in his mouth like a prisoner being forced to drink poison, mouthing the nipple, but not nursing. "Suck it, baby," she commanded. Tears rolled copiously down his face as he sucked on the nipple. This was the most humiliating thing that had ever happened to him. He felt his diaper growing wetter as he nursed and he knew he would be sopping by time she got around to changing him. "That's a good baby," she cooed maliciously at him. She walked out of the room, leaving him alone in the chair with the bottle. He tried to unfasten the strap and found that it was buckled behind him, out of his reach. He was trapped in the chair until she released him. When she returned 20 minutes later, he had finished the bottle and his diaper was a cold, dripping mess. Dorothy took the empty bottle from his hand and sat down in front of him. "So, you've trafficked with demons and unclean spirits, have you? Now look at you. This is God's punishment for your pride. You thought you could control a demon and look what it's done to you. You can't even control when you pee and poop. You acted like a child and now you're stuck in a baby's body. You can't take care of yourself now, you'll have to find a nanny to take care of you. If you're lucky, she'll be a Christian and raise you properly, so you won't be tempted by the devil again. For 2 cents I'd take down your diaper and spank you. You've been very, very naughty," she said, shaking her finger in his face. He looked shamefaced and moaned quietly, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do anything wrong, I do. Just wanted to be young again. I'm sorry I did it." She glared down at him with a self-righteously. "If I had raised you, you wouldn't have gotten into this mess. Is your mother still alive?" He shook his head no. "Your sister? Is there anyone in your family who can take care of you?" He shook his head no again. "Then I guess I will have to call the sheriff after all. I can't let you wander around outside in your condition with no one to take care of you. It won't be so bad, you'll see. They'll make you a ward of the court and appoint a guardian for you, then put you with a foster family. My husband and I are foster parents ourselves, so I know what I'm talking about." He couldn't look at her, he knew he had to ask her the next question, but it galled him to ask this woman in particular. If only she weren't so Christian, so goddamn self-righteous. Still, better the devil you know. He didn't think she would actually hurt him. Would why? You be my N.A. nanny, he asked meekly. She sat silently, stunned by his request. I'm not scheduled to take any babies, she thought to herself. I could take care of him, all I'd have to do is ask Jim if it would be okay with him. He's never minded before. Jim is always happy to play daddy when he's not working. And I could provide him with a strong Christian home to live in. He did ask me, maybe it's God's will. I'll see what Jim says. She smiled and said gently, well, we'll have to see what my husband Jim has to say. If he says it's okay, then I'll be your nanny. Is that okay with you? He nodded glumly, thinking that living here was better than being taken by the sheriff, barely. I think it's time to get you out of those wet diapers, don't you, she said, unstrapping him and picking him up out of the high chair. She carried him back to the nursery and changed him, then dressed him in a sleeper to keep him warm. She put him in the crib and said, do you think you'll be okay in the nursery a few minutes while I go next door and check your story? He nodded in agreement and she made him lie down and then tucked a comforter around him. She turned on the baby monitor on the wall and picked up a small receiver from the dresser and said, I'm taking this baby monitor with me. I'll be able to hear everything that goes on in here. If you need me, just call, and I'll come right back. Do you understand me? He squeaked out a small yes. I'm going to lock this door behind me, the window's already locked, so there's no point in trying to escape. She shut the door firmly behind her and he could hear the latch engaging. She's right, he thought, there's no point in trying to escape. Besides, if I got free she'd just call the sheriff and I'd be right back where I was. He closed his eyes and tried to rest. The warm milk and food had made him sleepy and it had been a long morning. Within minutes he was fast asleep. She woke him later after she had called Jim and asked him if it would be okay if she came and visited at work. He told her it had been a slow morning and they expected the afternoon to be the same, so she was welcome to come. Dorothy gathered up Dick and the videotape she had made and took him out to her car. She put him in a baby seat in the back of the car, then got in the driver's seat and they drove off. Dorothy explained to him that they were going to see her husband and not to worry, everything would be all right. The car's motion made him sleepy again and he dozed the rest of the trip. When he awoke, he was being carried into the emergency room of the local hospital. Dorothy marched right through the staff entrance doors and went to the nurse's station. She asked the nurse on duty if her husband was busy and was told no, he's in the ER doc's lounge. She went to the lounge, a small room that housed a bed, a telephone, and a TV with an integral VCR, and knocked on the door. Jim answered and told her to come in. She exchanged pleasantries with him before telling him what she wanted. When she started explaining who the baby was and how she had come to have him, Jim stared at her as if he thought she had lost her mind. She handed him the videotape and told him to look at the tape before making any judgments. He accepted the tape reluctantly and put it in the VCR. He said, before I look at this tape, I want to do a full examination of this baby, right now. He escorted them to an examination room in ER, then left them for a moment while he went outside to give orders to the nurses. He returned with a pediatric nurse in tow and told her to undress the baby. He asked his Dorothy to leave but she refused and he was forced to let her stand off to the side while he made his examination. He checked Dick carefully for frostbite and then began a very thorough neurological exam. The pediatric nurse took notes as he called off the presence or absence of each reflex. He had the nurse put Dick on the floor and try to get him to walk. Dick swayed unsteadily for a moment and then fell backwards on his bottom. The nurse took him by the hand to help him walk and the most Dick could accomplish was to take a few steps before he had to sit. Both the pediatric nurse and Dorothy coaxed him to cross the floor and he managed only by crawling the distance. When Jim was finished he asked the nurse to step outside while he spoke to his wife. Neurologically this is a 1-year-old baby, do you still insist that this is not a baby, but a full-grown man under a spell? Ask him his name, she replied simply. Okay, I'll ask him, but not because I believe he is anything but a baby. What's your name, baby? Dick glanced around the room, seemingly uncomprehending of Jim's question. Dick's attention had been wandering and he hadn't heard Jim. See, what did I tell you? Just a baby. Now, Dorothy, I'd like you to see Dr. Miller, the staff psychiatrist here, while I take care of this mess. I've had the nurses call the sheriff and he should be arriving any minute. Ask him again, she said with an undercurrent of anger in her voice. Jim sighed resignedly. What is your name? Jim demanded, looking straight into Dick's face. Dick. Chapter. Cham, he stuttered, unable to sound the last syllable of his name. Jim, surprised, said, What? Dick, he said, glaring at Jim. Jim called the PD nurse in to take care of Dick while they returned to the doctor's lounge to view the tape. When it had finished, Jim turned to Dorothy and said contritely, You're right. I just couldn't believe it. It's too fantastic. Dorothy smiled grimly and nodded. There was a knock on the door and a nurse asked if the sheriff could come in and talk to Dr. Mason. They invited the sheriff into the lounge and told him what they had seen. The sheriff asked for and was shown, then given the tape that Dorothy had made. Then they returned to the examination room where the sheriff asked Dick his name. Dick had regressed to the point that he could barely say his first name and wouldn't even attempt his last name. Jim and the sheriff had a hurried private conference in the hall and the sheriff left the hospital muttering to himself, This is the damnedest thing I ever heard of. Jim returned to the exam room, spoke to the nurse for a few moments and came out and talked to Dorothy. It's all settled, he said, at least for now. The sheriff's going to get a search warrant and go through Dick's house with a currycomb. He'll find out if Dick was telling the truth. In the meantime, Dick's obviously incompetent and in need of a full medical evaluation, so he'll stay here in the pediatric ward as a guest of the county. I'm sorry, but he won't be able to go home with you. We'll take good care of him here. The nurse came out carrying Dick in her arms against her shoulder and started up the hall to pediatrics. Dick saw that he was being taken away from Dorothy and began to scream in terror. Dorothy moved to follow, but Jim laid a hand on her arm and shook his head no. Dorothy turned away from Dick's wails reluctantly and was lovingly but firmly escorted to her car by Jim. Dorothy went home to wait for Jim to call when they finished their evaluation. Dorothy received a call about 11 p.m. that night from Jim. Hello Dorothy, he said. We finished the preliminary evaluation on Dick. We've had Dr. Peterson, the pediatrician, Dr. Payne, the radiologist, and Dr. Miller here all afternoon. It seems that Dick is a baby in every respect but one, no fontanelles. He has no growth plates, no fontanelles, nothing that would indicate that he in a growth stage. He won't be getting any bigger. Dr. Miller says the regression appears to be complete, but without communication he can't be sure. Dr. Payne and Dr. Peterson agree that his physical age is approximately 12 months with 3 months error either way. Most of his teeth have disappeared and Dr. Peterson has put him on a pre-weaning diet with formula. Dr. Miller wants to keep him under observation to determine his social development, but tentatively agrees with a 12-month assessment. The nurses up here love him and told me to tell you not to worry, they'll take good care of him. I'll be home in about an hour. I love you dear, bye. Dorothy put the phone down and went to bed. The nurses were right, I shouldn't worry about him. They'll take care of him, it's just that I feel responsible for him somehow. She decided she would call her friend, Marge, down at the courthouse tomorrow and see what she thought about the possibility of being chosen as his foster parent. If this was God's will, then it would happen, but it couldn't hurt to make a discreet inquiry. Several weeks passed and she had heard nothing. Jim told her that the sheriff had finished his investigation and had concluded that it appeared that Dick had been telling the truth. He still didn't want to believe it, but the combination of the physical evidence the sheriff had found at Dick's house, Dorothy's videotape and the medical evidence provided by Jim were conclusive. A hearing had been set to determine Dick's status, and Dorothy and Jim had been asked by the sheriff to testify. Dorothy talked to Jim about foster parenting Dick and he readily agreed. Aside from Dorothy's desire to become Dick's foster mother, Jim wanted to continue to monitor this case on a daily basis. They went to their attorney and asked him to represent them at the hearing. Dorothy was not allowed to see Dick again until the day of the hearing. She and Jim sat in the rear of the courtroom with their lawyer and waited for everyone else to arrive. A nurse from the pediatrics came in with Dick, followed closely by the public defender, his assistant, and the county attorney. Dick seemed happy and healthy and showed no indication at all of being nervous. He looked like he had no idea of where he was or what was going to happen. Jim had told Dorothy that there had been a minor furor over who would take Dick to court. The hospital felt he should be in custody of the sheriff or Child Protective Services. The sheriff had refused, saying that he had no authority to take custody of a baby without a court order, and Child Protective Services refused to take custody on the grounds that he was legally an adult. The lawyer assigned to protect Dick's rights in the case refused, saying that he was unqualified to act as a custodian. No one would accept responsibility for him, and in the end the hospital sent him with a nurse. The bailiff entered the courtroom and called it to order. The judge entered and they all rose and then were seated. The judge looked at his notes and called the attorneys to the bench for a conference. The judge then began. The case of the people v. Dick Chalmers is before this court today. The purpose of this hearing is to determine the competence of Mr. Chalmers. Is the defendant's attorney ready? Is the defendant present? Is the county attorney ready? Good, then we'll begin. I wish to point out to all present that this is not a criminal court and that the rules of evidence are more informal in a hearing of this kind. Nevertheless, witnesses will be sworn and the laws regarding perjury and contempt remain in full force. I hope it will not be necessary to point this out again in this hearing. I see from the county attorney's exhibits that medical testimony will be given. Are the physicians concerned present in the courtroom? The county attorney spoke up. If it please the court, the attending physician from the emergency room is present to give testimony. The other physicians have provided depositions. Has the defendant's counsel had access to the depositions? Asked the judge. Dick's lawyer answered, Yes, Your Honor. The judge continued, I see that the sheriff is here to give testimony. I also have a number of amicus curiae briefs, one from the defendant's bank, which claims to have a full power of attorney in financial matters and wishes to continue in that capacity, one from Child Protective Services, which argues that they have no jurisdiction in this case, and a third from the Dr. and Mrs. Mason requesting appointment as foster parents for the defendant. I fail to see how I can appoint a foster parent for an adult, but the court will consider that issue after competency issue has been disposed of. Mr. County Attorney. If it please the court, Your Honor, it is the state's contention that the defendant is both physically and mentally incompetent to handle his affairs, and the defendant, having no known relatives, should be protected from the consequences of his incompetency, said the county attorney. Defense. Your Honor, under the circumstances the defense wishes to stipulate incompetency and only wishes to represent the defendant's interest in guardianship and custodial issues, said the defending attorney. The judge removed his glasses and looked down at the defense in disapproval. Did I misunderstand, or did I hear the defense say that he wishes to stipulate the entire competency issue, said the judge. The judge put his glasses back on and said, I have recently returned from vacation and there may be aspects of the case that are known to everyone in this court but myself. However, as the judge of record in this case, I cannot allow the defendant's rights to be surrendered without a proper hearing. Mr. County Attorney, I direct you to proceed with your case as if defense counsel opposed it. I expect the defense, if it is not going to oppose the issue, to at least assist with the exploration of the facts, in order that your client's interests be represented fairly. Mr. County Attorney, I believe that you wish to call the sheriff first. The sheriff was called and sworn and testified about what he had seen in the hospital and what the search of the defendant's house had revealed. At the end of his testimony, the judge stopped the sheriff and asked, "Sheriff, do you mean to say that you believe that a demon caused the defendant's incompetence?" "Your Honor, I don't know what caused it, all I know is what I saw and found in the house." Dr. Mason was called next, and he testified that the defendant appeared to have the mental and physical competence of a 1-year-old. He also testified that in his professional opinion, barring a miracle, Mr. Chamus' condition would not improve. When Dr. Mason eluded his wife's tape, the judge's interest was piqued. "Mr. County Attorney, there is no mention of this tape in your exhibits. Is this tape available and why haven't you included it in the evidence?" "Your Honor, I have the tape with me. The tape has many personal financial details of the defendant's life. Since the defense had informed me of his intention to stipulate the issue of competency, I had thought it would not be necessary to reveal these details in open court. My intention, Your Honor, was to preserve the defendant's privacy in so far as possible. The court recognizes the efforts of the county attorney to preserve the defendant's privacy, but finds that the need for the facts outweighs other considerations. The court would like to see this tape. In the interests of the defendant's privacy, the court will view this tape in chambers. I would like to have the defendant and his attorney present as well as the county attorney. I would also like to have Mrs. Mason present, since she was present at the time the tape was made. Court will recess for 15 minutes while the bailiff prepares the tape for viewing. Mr. County Attorney, if you would give the tape to the bailiff. This hearing will reconvene in my chambers." "Court is recessed," he said, banging the gavel. The Dorothy found her way to the judge's chambers, which was guarded by the bailiff. When the nurse attempted to enter with Dick, the judge turned to the public defender's assistant and said, "Mr. Chamus, your girlfriend and her child will have to remain outside." The assistant protested that he was not Mr. Chamus and was ignored by the judge. The judge then turned to the defense attorney and said, "Sir, would you direct your client to remove his girlfriend?" "Your Honor, that's my assistant, not my client." "That's my client," pointing to Dick. The judge looked at him in disbelief and then saw the faces of everyone in the room. He saw that there was general agreement about the identity of defendant and motioned the nurse and Dick into his chambers. "You may come in, I'll sort this out after I've seen the tape," he said tiredly. The judge invited everyone present to be seated, the lights were dimmed and the tape was shown. When the tape was finished, he turned to Dorothy, pointed to Dick and said, "Mrs. Mason, is that the defendant sitting on that woman's lap?" "Yes, Your Honor," she said demurely. "Bring Mr. Chamus over to me, I'd like to question him myself," he ordered the nurse. The nurse brought him to the judge, who sat him on his knee and proceeded to question him. "Mr. Chamus, do you know why you are here?" he asked kindly. Dick gazed absently around the room. He took Dick's chin in his hand and asked, "Do you know your name?" Dick saw Dorothy and his eyes lit up. He smiled and stretched out his arms for Dorothy to take him. "Do you know her?" he asked. The judge waited patiently for Dick's excitement to die down. Suddenly the judge frowned and looked down at his leg. In his excitement, Dick had flooded his diaper and the pants leg of the judge's three-piece suit was soaked. The judge motioned for the nurse to take Dick, then took his handkerchief and blotted the wet spot on his trousers. "Mrs. Mason," he said, "I understand you and your husband want custody of Mr. Chamus. Can you tell me why?" Dorothy explained that she and her husband were childless and that they had been employed by the state as foster parents for many different babies. She told the judge about Dick's request that she take care of him and about her husband's continuing professional interest in Dick. "He certainly seems to like you," the judge observed. The judge looked at the attorneys and said, "I trust there will be no objection if I place Mr. Chamus in Mrs. Mason's care." They shook their heads no. Would the public defender have any objection if I left the bank in charge of Mr. Chalmers' financial affairs? If that arrangement is subject to periodic review by his guardian, I have no particular objection, Your Honor, said Dick's attorney. Would either of you have any objections if I made Mr. Chalmers a ward of the court and named myself as guardian? He asked, looking at both attorneys again. They sat stunned by the sudden turn of events, then shook their heads vigorously. Then let's reconvene in the courtroom and finish this, he said briskly. The hearing was reconvened in the courtroom and the judge quickly ruled that Mr. Richard Chalmers was incompetent both mentally and physically to handle his affairs and was unlikely to become competent in the near future. Mr. Chalmers was made a ward of the court, and since Child Protective Services felt they could not act as guardian, the judge appointed himself as guardian. The judge ruled that Mr. Chalmers' interests continued to be served by the relationship of the bank and Mr. Chalmers and let the power of attorney stand, subject to later review, and finally, he directed that Mr. Chalmers be placed in the care of Mrs. Mason, that the payments for Mr. Chalmers' care be paid out of his estate, including the monthly payment to the foster parents at the scale provided by law for foster parents employed by the state. Dick was riding home with Dorothy within the hour. He gurgled and bubbled happily at the world around him. Dorothy marveled at how happy he seemed to be. Perhaps this wasn't God's curse after all. If happiness was God's blessing, then he was blessed. Dorothy called him Dickie and, within a few days, they were behaving like a mother and her firstborn baby. He crawled, made messes in his diaper, played peekaboo, and cried when he needed her. Dorothy enjoyed every minute of it. Dorothy decided she would take him to church on Sunday, both as an object lesson to the teenagers in the church and to see whether the minister's faith healing could help Dickie. She dressed him up and took him to church. She carried him in, stopping to talk to the minister and introduce him to Dickie. She asked him if he thought faith healing would help Dickie. The minister was excited to have him there and relished the chance to undo Satan's work. He told her to sit in the front row so they could be first when the healings were done. The service started with a hymn from the choir followed by the doxology. The minister began preaching about sin and forgiveness and the power of God's healing. He asked for all those in need of healing to come forward and motioned to Dorothy. Dorothy carried Dick up to the stage and was helped up the steps by the minister. He explained Dickie's manifold sins to the congregation and the demon's curse while he waited for the afflicted parishioners to line up to be healed. When they were ready, he slapped Dickie on the top on his head saying, "In the name of Jesus, you are healed." The minister grew excited, his face became frenzied and he shouted, "I feel the power, I feel Jesus' power. The curse is lifted, you are forgiven," and slapped him on the forehead. The slap brought a blinding burst of light to Dickie's eyes and he felt stunned. The minister went down the line repeating the formula for everyone in the line. Dickie's consciousness seemed to telescope in and out of focus and the rest of the service was a blur that faded in and out of his mind. He awoke in his crib later that afternoon with a wet diaper and started to cry. A few moments later Dorothy came in and asked, "Is Dickie's diaper wet? Does Dickie need changing?" And she started to change him. "Dickie? Dickie? My name is Dick," he thought furiously. Then the memories of the past months filled him. He had regressed until he had the mind of an infant. The minister had lifted the curse. He had an adult mind again. He tried to tell Dorothy the good news but all that came out was a baby's babble. She smiled condescendingly at his infantile attempts at communication. Dorothy carried him to the family room and put him on the floor to play while she took a break from typing the church bulletin on her computer. She had left the computer on and the word processor loaded while she was sat down to watch part of the Sunday afternoon movie. Dick sat disgustedly and wondered how he could tell Dorothy he could think again. He clambered onto the computer chair and sat in front of the keyboard. He clumsily pecked out a message for Dorothy, "Dorothy, I can think again. The minister cured me. I don't need a guardian now." He waved his arms and pointed to the screen. She looked at him, smiled tolerantly, then went back to watching the movie before realizing that he was destroying her work on the computer. She rushed over to the computer, slapped his hands and picked him up saying, "Naughty baby. Mustn't touch Dorothy's computer." He became angry and started screaming at the top of his lungs. She held him on her hip while she inspected the damage to her work. Dorothy read the message incredulously and said to him, "That's only a crazy accident, you can't type, you're only a baby." Dick made typing motions with his hands and indicated that he wanted to use the keyboard. She used the computer trackball to highlight, then erase his additions to her files and then created a new document. She sat him down on the chair again and said, "Okay Dickie, I don't believe for a minute that you can type. Here's your chance to prove it to me." He put his hands over the keyboard and slowly typed out a new message with one finger, "Imcured." Dorothy stood staring at the screen in shock as he rapidly spelled, "I don't need you to take care of me." He waited a short time then typed, "Now." A curious expression of disbelief mixed with dismay crossed her face, then vanished as a look of understanding came into her eyes. She reached down and picked him up then carried him to the couch. "You can think again, can't you?" she demanded furiously. He nodded his agreement. "You are not a man. You're a baby. Do you understand?" she raged at him. She shook him and said, "You're never going to type again. Do you understand me? You're a baby and you're going to stay a baby, my baby." He shook his head no without thinking. "What do you mean, no? You're mine now, my baby. And you're going to stay that way." She turned him over her knee and began spanking him. He cried in helpless frustration as she spanked him until he could feel his pulse throb painfully in his bottom with every heartbeat. The pain grew until it was agonizing. He struggled in a futile attempt to escape. Finally she stopped, picked him up and held him with his face 3 inches from hers and asked, "Are you going to type on the computer again?" He shook his head no as tears of pain rolled down his face. "Are you going to be a good baby?" He nodded yes. "You're going to be Mommy's sweet baby forever and ever, aren't you?" He nodded yes and she cuddled him to her breast. "I know what Mommy's baby needs to take his mind off spelling," she said, carrying him into the kitchen. She went to the refrigerator, reached in and pulled out a bottle. She guided the nipple into his mouth, saying, "Take it, baby. Suck on your baba. Take it or Mommy will spank." He put his mouth around the nipple and was surprised to find that his mouth automatically began to suck. He glanced up at her and saw she was beaming maternally down at him as he nosily suckled the bottle. She took him back into the living room and sat down with him on her lap while he continued to nurse his formula. As his stomach became full, he realized that his crotch felt warm. He was peeing as fast as he swallowed the formula. He wanted to cry, but his body was too busy nursing to do anything but suckle. When he was finished, she burped him and rested his head against her breast. She kept him cuddled in her arms for a long time afterwards. "From now on, the computer's off limits to you, baby. Do you understand? Off limits. You're never going to spell anything again. Mommy's going to throw away your blocks too, baby. You won't need them. Will you?" He shook his head no, causing a tear of submission to roll off his cheek and down into his ear. It was clear now that the demon hadn't cursed him, it had merely regressed him as he had demanded. It was the minister who had really cursed him, leaving an adult mind in an infant's body. God had cursed him for the sin of necromancy, causing him to be found and fostered by someone who would never let him grow up. He had been granted the boon of everlasting youth and been given into the care of someone who would cherish and nurture him for the rest of his life. He realized now that wishes fulfilled too well are curses. Worst of all, he realized that this is what he had always wanted, a good woman to love and take care of him. He loved her too. He couldn't help himself. He wanted to be with her forever. He loved his mommy. Time would soon become meaningless to him as the days merged into months and the months became years. He would drift on an ocean of baby formula amid aisles of soggy diapers. Scenes from his future flashed through his consciousness. Dick witnessed the slow destruction of his mind as he saw himself adapting to his environment. He saw himself chortling and cooing in Dorothy's arms happily as she tickled his chin. He observed himself crawling in a playpen and playing contentedly with the other infants in the church nursery on Sundays. He felt his distress as the diaper rash he would soon have made him cry and hold out his arms to be picked up and comforted by her. His psyche would be bounded by the simple needs of a babe. He would be changed, as all men are, by the events which shaped his life. His soul would be transformed by a lifetime of infancy into a guiltless, innocent spirit that was incapable of sin. He sensed with mounting horror the grey blankness that marked the end of his life. The judgment that lay after his life frightened him. Somehow he knew he wasn't going to hell. God would allow him into heaven, he realized, but there would be a price beyond what he had already paid. He had the distinct feeling that he would spend an eternity in diapers.